Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay. So I've never told this to anyone before, not even my closest friends or family, because honestly, who would believe it? But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it out there. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just make me relive the terror all over again. Either way, here goes. It was a Sunday, one of those perfect late summer days where the air is just warm enough to ride without a jacket, but not so hot that you're sweating under your helmet. My spouse and I had decided to take the Honda Goldwing out for a spin. We'd bought it a couple years back, and it was our little escape from the daily grind. That bike is a beast, smooth and heavy, with a deep rumble that usually feels comforting like it's part of the road. We were heading south on Chazy Lake Road, aiming for Saranac, New York. It's a route we've taken a bunch of times, mostly because it's scenic and quiet, cutting through stretches of forest that make you feel like you're miles from anywhere. That day, though, the quiet felt different. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was like the world had gone still in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. We'd been riding for about half an hour, just enjoying the breeze and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, when I noticed how dead silent it was. No birds chirping, no rustling in the underbrush. Not even the distant hum of another car. It was eerie, like someone had hit mute on everything. I remember gripping the handlebars a little tighter, my knuckles turning white, and I called back to my spouse over the intercom. "Hey, do you hear that? It's too quiet." They just nodded against my back, their hands tightening around my waist. I pulled in the clutch to coast, letting the engine noise fade away so we could just glide. The bike rolled almost silently, and the only sound was the wind whistling past our helmets. It was peaceful for a second, but that stillness started to feel heavy, like something was watching us. I shook it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. Maybe I'd watched one too many horror movies or something. We rounded a gentle curve in the road, the kind where the trees lean in close on both sides, creating a tunnel of green. And that's when we saw them. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards away, two figures were standing in the middle of the road. My brain didn't process it at first. I thought they were bears or something, but they were upright, on two legs, and huge. They were both facing each other, like they were having some kind of standoff or conversation. But they were so still, it was unnatural. They were covered in thick black hair that looked matted and shaggy, almost like wet fur. And they were tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that made them seem even bigger. I'd guess they weighed well over 200 pounds each, just massive. The second we came into view, they both turned their heads toward us at the same time. I couldn't see their faces clearly from that distance, but I felt their eyes on me. It was like a physical jolt, this cold spike of fear that shot straight down my spine. Then, in a split second, they moved. They didn't just run, they exploded into motion so fast it was blurry. One went left, the other right, diving into the woods on opposite sides of the road. And the way they ran, it wasn't like a person or an animal I'd ever seen. They were slightly bent at the waist, kind of hunched over, but their legs pumped with this powerful, fluid grace that was terrifying. They vanished into the trees without a sound, like they'd never been there at all. I slammed on the brakes without even thinking, the bike skidding a little on the gravel shoulder. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I was breathing in ragged gasps. My spouse's grip on me turned into a death clutch, their fingers digging into my sides. For a long moment we just sat there, frozen, staring at the spot where they'd been. The road was empty now, just a strip of asphalt winding through the forest, and the silence felt even heavier than before, like it was pressing in on us. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice shaky. My spouse just nodded. their helmet bumping against mine. We didn't say anything else for a minute, both of us trying to process what the hell had just happened. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, making my hands tremble on the handlebars. I slowly let out the clutch and eased the bike forward, rolling toward where they'd been standing. My eyes were darting all over, scanning the tree line, half expecting them to jump out at us. When we reached the spot, I killed the engine completely, and we got off the bike. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean against the seat to steady myself. The air was cool and still, with that damp, earthy smell of the woods, but there was no sign of them. No broken branches, no footprints on the soft shoulder. Nothing. It was like they disappeared into thin air. I walked a few steps into the grass, my boots crunching on gravel, and peered into the woods. The trees were dense, shadows pooling between them, and I couldn't see more than a few feet in. It was dark and impenetrable, and the thought of going in there made my skin crawl. My spouse came up beside me, their face pale under the helmet visor. "What were they?" they asked, their voice barely above a whisper. I just shook my head. I had no idea. Bears don't stand like that or move that way, and they sure as hell don't coordinate escapes like that. These things had acted with a purpose, like they knew exactly what they were doing. I kept thinking about their size, how towering they were, how their shoulders bulged with muscle under that dark hair, and the speed. It was inhuman. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone, swallowed by the forest. We stood there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a couple of minutes. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the road, and the temperature was dropping. I started to feel exposed, like we were being watched from the trees. Every little sound, a leaf rustling, a twig snapping, made me jump. My spouse must have felt it too, because they grabbed my arm and said, "We need to go now." We got back on the bike, and I fumbled with the key, my hands still shaking. When the engine roared to life, it was almost a relief, breaking that oppressive silence. I didn't coast this time. I gunned it, speeding down the road as fast as I dared, my eyes glued to the path ahead. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see those figures chasing us, but there was nothing, just empty road and trees. The rest of the ride to Saranac was a blur. I don't remember much except the tightness in my chest, and the way my spouse's arms stayed wrapped around me the whole time, like they were afraid to let go. We didn't talk about what we'd seen. We didn't need to. I could feel the shared fear between us, this unspoken agreement that we'd witnessed something we weren't supposed to. When we finally pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town, I cut the engine and we just sat there for a minute, breathing heavily. My helmet felt claustrophobic, so I took it off, and the cool air hit my sweaty face. My spouse did the same, and I saw the same wide-eyed shock in their eyes that I felt. "We can't tell anyone," they said quietly, and I nodded. Who would believe us? They'd think we were drunk or crazy, making up stories about Bigfoot or something. But it wasn't like that. It was too real, too visceral. We filled up the tank in silence, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those figures lurking at the edge of the parking lot. The normalcy of the gas station, the smell of gasoline, the buzz of fluorescent lights felt surreal after what we'd been through. People were going about their business, pumping gas, buying snacks, completely unaware that something like that could be out there. On the ride back, we took a different route, avoiding Chasey Lake Road altogether. I couldn't bear the thought of going back there, not even in daylight. The whole way home, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Were they animals? Were they something else? The way they stood facing each other, it was almost human, but not quite. And the coordination, splitting up like that, it felt intelligent, purposeful. When we got home, we parked the bike in the garage and went inside without a word. The house felt safe, familiar, but the fear had followed us in. I kept the lights on all night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. My spouse and I didn't sleep much. We just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those dark, hairy forms turning to look at us, then vanishing into the woods. In the days that followed, we tried to brush it off, to convince ourselves it was just a weird encounter with wildlife. But deep down, we knew it wasn't. The terror of that moment never really faded. It just settled into a low hum of anxiety that's been with me ever since. I find myself avoiding lonely roads, especially at dusk, and I'm hyper-aware of any unusual sounds when I'm out in nature. What gets me the most even now is how quickly they disappeared. One minute they were there, solid and real, and the next, poof, gone without a trace. It's that swiftness, that almost supernatural ability to vanish that haunts me. I've spent years turning it over in my head, wondering what they were, why they were there, and if they're still out there watching. But I'll never know, and that's the scariest part. We never saw them again, and we never spoke about it to anyone else. It's our secret, this shared horror that binds us, and sometimes on quiet nights, I can still feel their eyes on me. And I know we weren't supposed to see what we saw. Story 2. Okay, I'll try to write this. I've never written it all down before, never told it to anyone who wasn't there, and even then we didn't talk about it much after. It just became this thing we all knew, this cold spot in our memories. But I see folks here talk about things, strange things, and it makes me think maybe I should get it out. This was a long time ago. I was just a boy. It was the winter of 1839, out at Fish Lake in Indiana. The day it happened, the cold was the first thing. It wasn't just winter cold, it was a mean cold. The kind that gets deep into your bones and sets up shop, making your joints ache and your breath come out in clouds so thick you could almost grab them. The sky was the color of dirty dishwater, a flat, solid gray that promised more snow, but hadn't delivered it yet. I was maybe 12 years old, and my job that afternoon was to check the trap lines my pa had set along the southern edge of the lake near the sand hills. It was a lonely job, but I didn't mind it. Out there, it was just you and the silence. A silence so complete, you could hear the ice on the lake groaning and cracking like some old giant shifting in its sleep. I remember the sounds most of all, because that's what broke the silence first. It wasn't an animal sound, not like any I knew. I'd heard foxes scream, and bobcats, and the howl of a wolf on a still night. This was different. It was a yell, but not a human one. It was broken, frightful, a hideous, high-pitched kind of shrieking that was part anger and part something else, something like pain. It cut through the cold air and made the hairs on my arms stand straight up, even under my thick wool coat. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked around, my head whipping side to side, but I saw nothing. Just the bare, skeletal trees and the vast frozen expanse of the lake, and those low, rolling sandhills covered in a dusting of old snow. I stood there for a long minute, my breath puffing out in quick, scared bursts, listening. The sound didn't come again. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. The wind can play tricks, making noises as it whistles through the icy reeds. I tried to convince myself of that, and I started walking again, a little quicker this time, my hand tight on the strap of the burlap sack I carried for the traps. I made my way down closer to the lake shore, where the ice was thinner and the water lapped piteously at the edge. The sand was frozen stiff, crunching under my boots. And that's when I saw the tracks. They weren't deer tracks, they weren't bear tracks, they were almost human but not right. The shape was wrong, longer and narrower, with a deeper impression at the ball of the foot, like whatever made them was running on its toes. And they were big, bigger than my pa's boots. A cold dread, colder than the winter air, started to seep into me. I followed them with my eyes. They came out of the woods, down to the water's edge, and then they just vanished. Like whatever made them had just stepped into the lake and disappeared. I was staring at that spot where the tracks ended, my mind racing, when the yelling started again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It wasn't a single yell, but a series of them. Those same frightful, hideous shrieks, one after another, bouncing off the frozen lake and the sand hills. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I spun around, my heart in my throat, and that's when I saw it. It was on the other side of a small, frozen inlet, maybe 50 yards away. It was running along the shore, a low, fast-moving shape against the pale sand and dirty snow. It was maybe 4 feet high, like a small man or a very large child, but it was covered in hair, a thick, matted coat of hair, the color of a light chestnut, the kind you see on an old saddle. It moved with a speed I have never seen anything move with before or since. It wasn't just running, it was flowing. Its legs a blur, its long arms pumping. It was terrifyingly fast. It stopped for a second and it plunged its arms into the shallow, icy water at the lake's edge. It was searching for something, its movements frantic. It pulled out a frog, frozen and half dead, and shoved it into its mouth hole. Then it saw a fish, trapped in a tiny pocket of open water, and it lunged, its hands snatching the fish out with a quick, brutal motion. It didn't eat that one, just held it, looking around, and then it let out another one of those awful yells. This one was different. It was directed. It was looking right at me. Our eyes met. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark patch under a heavy brow, but I felt its gaze. It was a raw, wild intelligence in there, and it saw me. It knew I was there. The fear that shot through me was pure and absolute. It was the kind of fear that empties your mind of everything except the need to run. I turned and I ran. I didn't think about my trapline. I didn't think about my pa. I just ran. I crashed back through the undergrowth, my boots slipping on the frozen ground, branches whipping at my face. I could hear it behind me. Not just its yells, which were now constant, a piercing soundtrack to my terror, but the sound of its pursuit. The pounding of its feet on the ground was incredibly fast, a rapid, heavy thumping that was gaining on me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was chasing me. It had crossed the inlet, moving through the shallow water without even seeming to notice the cold, and was now in the woods with me, leaping over fallen logs with that impossible speed. Its body was lean and powerful, all corded muscle under that matted hair. Its yells were closer now, filled with a new intensity. It wasn't just yelling, it was hunting. I've never been so scared in my life. My lungs burned with the cold air, and my legs felt like they were made of wet sand. I was sobbing, gasping, sure I was about to die. I could smell it now, a musky, wild animal smell, like a wet dog but stronger, mixed with the dank smell of the lake and something else, something foul. I burst out of the trees near the edge of our property. Our cabin was maybe 200 yards away, smoke curling from the chimney. It looked 1,000,000 miles away. I screamed for my pa, my voice a thin, reedy thing lost in the wind and the creature's relentless yells. I could hear it right behind me, so close I thought I could feel its breath on my neck. I tripped. My foot caught on a hidden root and I went down hard. The wind knocked out of me. I scrambled onto my back, kicking my feet, expecting it to be on top of me. I looked up and it was there, standing over me. It had stopped just a few feet away. It wasn't yelling anymore. It was just looking at me. This close, I could see it clearly. The hair on its face was shorter, but still thick, covering everything except around its eyes and a flat, wide nose. Its eyes were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and they held no human emotion I could name. No anger, no curiosity, just a flat, ancient wildness. Its mouth was open, panting, and I could see its teeth, yellowed and strong. It made a low, guttural sound in its chest, a kind of chuffing noise. It took a step closer, its head cocked to the side. I could smell that odor strongly now, a pungent, living smell. I was frozen, paralyzed, sure my life was over. Then, from the direction of the cabin, I heard my pa's voice shouting my name. He must have heard my scream. The creature's head snapped up. Its eyes left me and looked toward the sound. It let out one last short yell, this one sounding almost like a warning, and then it turned. In 2 bounds, it was back at the tree line. It didn't run back the way it came. It just vanished into the woods, its movement so fluid and quick, it was like it had been swallowed by the shadows. 1 second, it was there, a solid, terrifying thing, and the next, it was just gone. The sound of its movement faded almost instantly. The woods were silent again, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing and my pa's frantic calls, getting closer. He found me a minute later, still on the ground, shaking so hard I could barely stand. I tried to tell him what happened, my words tumbling over each other, a jumbled mess about a wild child, a hairy thing, its speed, its yells. He listened, his face grim. He helped me up and we went back to the spot. The tracks were there, plain as day, leading right up to where I had fallen. He saw them. He saw the look on my face. He didn't say I was imagining things. We went back to the cabin, and he got his rifle. He and a couple of other men from nearby farms went out later that afternoon to try and track it. They were good hunters, experienced woodsmen. They followed the tracks for miles, deep into the sand hills. They said the thing had run in a straight line, never slowing, leaping over obstacles that would have slowed a man to a crawl. But eventually, even the tracks just stopped. They ended at the base of a large, rocky outcrop, and there was no sign of where it had gone. It was like it had climbed straight up the sheer rock face or simply disappeared into the earth. They never caught it. They never even saw it again. Not that day, not ever. It was just gone. It left behind a mystery, a story that became a whisper in our community for a while before folks moved on to other things. But I never moved on. I never went back to check the trap lines by myself again. For years, every time I heard an odd sound in the woods, my heart would leap into my throat. Every shadow that moved just wrong would send a jolt of that old familiar fear through me. I'm an old man now. I've lived a long life, seen a lot of things, but I've never seen anything like that again. I've never found an explanation that fits. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a man. It was something else, something wild and ancient and piteous, living out there on the edges of our world, a thing that ran with great velocity and let out those frightful, hideous yells. A thing that looked at me with those dark, wild eyes and decided, for whatever reason, not to kill me. I still don't know why. I still don't know what it was. I just know it was real, and I know it was out there. And for all I know, it still is. Story 3. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I've never posted anything like this before, but after reading some stories on here, I figured maybe someone will get it. This happened about 5 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I still think about it all the time, especially when I'm out in the woods or it starts getting dark early. It was late summer, and my family decided to go camping in Arizona. We're from Phoenix, so we'd driven up toward the Mogollon Rim area, where it's all pine forests and canyons, way different from the desert back home. I was 14 at the time, and I remember being kind of bored in the car because it was a long drive. My grandparents were in the front seats, my grandpa driving and my grandma navigating with an old paper map. My uncle was in the back with me, and he'd fallen asleep almost as soon as we hit the winding roads. He was snoring lightly, and I was just staring out the window watching the trees go by. The sun was starting to set, so it was that time of day where everything gets kinda soft and shadowy. Dusk, you know. The light was fading fast, and the forest felt thick and dark on either side of the road. We were on this narrow gravel road that cut through the trees, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. My grandpa was driving slow, careful because of the ruts and potholes. The car was an old SUV, and it rattled a bit on the rough surface. I could smell the pine through the cracked window, mixed with the dust from the road. I was just zoning out, watching the headlights cut through the growing darkness. They didn't reach far. maybe 50 feet ahead, and beyond that it was just blackness. The trees were so close together that it felt like we were driving through a tunnel. Every now and then, I'd see eyes reflecting back from the roadside, probably deer or something, but they'd vanish quick. It was peaceful, but in a way that made me a little uneasy, like the woods were alive and watching us. Then it happened. We came around a gentle curve, and I saw movement on the opposite side of the road. At first, I thought it was another deer, but it was bigger, way bigger. My eyes snapped to it, and for a few seconds, it was right there in the headlights. It stepped out from between two tall pines, and I could see it clearly, or as clearly as you can in dim light. It was huge, taller than any person I've ever seen, and covered in dark, shaggy fur that looked almost black in the light. It didn't lurch or shuffle like a bear. It walked upright, smooth and steady, like a person would, but with this powerful, fluid motion that made my stomach drop. I froze. I couldn't even breathe for a second. It was only visible for maybe 3 or 4 seconds before it moved away from the road and disappeared into the trees. But in that short time, I saw how its arms swung naturally, how its head was held up, and how it just melted into the shadows. There was no sound, no crackling branches or anything, which made it even creepier. It was like it was part of the forest, moving through it without disturbing a thing. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I whipped around to look at my uncle, but he was still asleep, his head lolled against the window. I leaned forward, gripping the back of my grandpa's seat. "Grandpa, did you see that?" My voice came out all shaky and high-pitched. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes kind of tired. "See what, kiddo?" "That thing on the side of the road. It was huge, and it walked on 2 legs. I was talking fast, my words tumbling out. I pointed toward where I'd seen it, but it was just darkness now. My grandpa chuckled, that low, easy laugh he always has. "Probably just a bear, sweetie. They stand up sometimes, you know, especially around here." But I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. We've got them in Arizona, and they don't move like that. Bears are clumsy when they're upright, kind of wobbly. And they don't have that smooth, purposeful walk. This thing moved like it knew where it was going, like it was built for it. "No, it wasn't," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was different, taller, and the way it walked, it was too smooth, and it was covered in dark fur, but it wasn't bulky like a bear." My grandma turned in her seat, her face soft in the dim light from the dashboard. "It's easy to get spooked out here when it's dark, honey. Your mind plays tricks on you." I felt a surge of frustration. Why wouldn't they believe me? I wasn't imagining things. I'd seen it clear as day, or as clear as dusk allows. My hands were trembling, and I clenched them into fists. "I'm not spooked," I said, trying to sound calm. "I really saw something. It was right there." My grandpa just shook his head and focused back on the road. "Well, whatever it was, it's gone now. We'll be at the campsite soon." I slumped back in my seat, feeling deflated. My uncle stirred a little but didn't wake up. I kept staring out the window, my eyes glued to the trees, hoping to catch another glimpse, but also terrified that I might. The forest seemed darker now, more menacing. Every shadow felt like it could be moving, and the rustling leaves sounded louder. I could feel the adrenaline still buzzing through me, making my skin prickly. The rest of the drive was quiet, except for the hum of the engine and my uncle's snoring. I didn't say anything else, but my mind was racing. What was that thing? I'd heard stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I always thought they were just myths, something from TV shows. But what I saw fit the descriptions: tall, hairy, walking on 2 legs. It wasn't a person in a costume. No one would be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that, just stepping out onto a remote road, and it was too big, too real. We reached the campsite about 20 minutes later. It was a small clearing off the road with a fire pit and a couple of picnic tables. The stars were starting to come out, and the air was getting chilly. My grandpa parked the car, and we all got out to set up camp. My uncle finally woke up, stretching and yawning, completely unaware of what had happened. I helped with the tents, but my hands were still unsteady, and I kept glancing over my shoulder into the trees. While we were unpacking, I tried bringing it up again. "Uncle, did you see anything weird on the drive here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He shrugged, rubbing his eyes. "Nah, I was out like a light. Why, did you see a ghost or something?" He laughed, but it didn't feel mocking, just clueless. I shook my head and didn't push it. What was the point? They all thought I was just a kid letting my imagination run wild, but I knew what I saw. The image was burned into my brain. That dark shape stepping out, moving with such ease, and then vanishing like it was never there. It didn't run or hurry, it just walked away like it had somewhere to be. As we set up the tents and started a fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods around us were silent, but it was a heavy silence, like something was holding its breath. Every little noise, a twig snapping, the wind rustling the leaves, made me jump. My grandma noticed I was on edge and handed me a marshmallow to roast, trying to distract me. "It's beautiful out here, isn't it?" she said, smiling. I nodded, but I didn't feel the beauty. I felt exposed, like we were intruders in a place we didn't belong. The fire crackled and the warmth felt good, but it didn't reach the cold knot in my stomach. I kept my back to the trees, facing the fire, because I didn't want to look into the darkness. My grandpa told stories about camping when he was young, but I barely heard them. All I could think about was that thing and how it moved. Later, when we were settling into our tents for the night, I lay awake in my sleeping bag, listening. The forest was alive with sounds, crickets, owls, the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. But underneath it all, I kept imagining footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the underbrush. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, stepping out from the trees, and I'd jolt awake, my heart racing. The next day, we went hiking and fishing, and everyone else seemed to have forgotten about it, but I didn't. I kept scanning the trees, looking for any sign, broken branches, footprints, anything. I didn't find anything, though. It was like it never happened, except in my head. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see it perfectly, that brief outline in the dim light, the way it moved, the sheer size of it. I've never told anyone else about it because I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. It was something else, something that doesn't fit into any neat explanation. And that's what haunts me, not knowing, and the feeling that whatever it was, it's still out there, hidden in those deep Arizona woods, waiting. Story 4. So, this is something I've never really talked about with anyone because, honestly, most people would think I'm crazy or making it up, but it's been eating at me for years now, and I figure if I don't get it out somewhere, it'll just keep haunting me. I was driving home from a friend's place out in the sticks of South Carolina. This was back maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I don't remember the exact date, but it was late afternoon. The kind of time where the sun starts dipping low and everything gets that golden glow, but shadows stretch out long and creepy. I'd taken this back gravel road as a shortcut, something I'd done a handful of times before without any issue. It was just a narrow, rutted path, really, lined thick with pine trees and oaks, their branches hanging over the road like they were trying to swallow it up. The gravel crunched under my tires, and dust kicked up behind me, coating everything in a fine grey powder. I was in my old pickup truck, a beat-up Ford that had seen better days, but it usually got me where I needed to go. That day, though, it let me down. I felt the thump, thump, thump first. Then the steering wheel started pulling hard to the right. I knew right away it was a flat. Cursing under my breath, I pulled over to the side, the tires scraping against the rough gravel. The road was deserted. No houses, no other cars, just me and the woods. I remember thinking how quiet it was, The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I turned off the engine and the silence rushed in, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Getting out, I walked around to the passenger side and saw the tire was completely flat, sagging into the dirt. I sighed, already annoyed because I had plans that evening and this was going to make me late. I popped the bed open and grabbed the jack and the spare tire. The spare was one of those donut types, small and kinda pathetic, but it would have to do. I set the jack under the frame, started cranking it up, the metal groaning as the truck lifted slowly. The whole time I was glancing around, not because I was scared yet, but just because being alone out there felt off. The trees were so dense, you couldn't see more than a few feet in, and the light was fading fast, turning from gold to a dim orange. I got the truck high enough and started loosening the lug nuts with the wrench. They were tight, rusted on probably, and I had to put my whole weight into it, grunting with the effort. My hands were getting sweaty, and I wiped them on my jeans, leaving dark smudges. That's when I heard it, the first scream. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a human scream, not an animal I recognized. It was deep, sharp, and it cut through the quiet like a knife. It came from the trees maybe 50 feet away, and it froze me right in place. My heart jumped into my throat, and I dropped the wrench, the clatter sounding way too loud in the silence. I stood there, not moving, just listening. My breath was coming in shallow pants, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. For a second, I thought maybe it was a bird or something, but no bird sounds like that. It was too guttural, too raw. Then it came again, closer this time, much closer, like it was just 15 feet away, right at the edge of the trees. This time, it was clearer, and it sent a chill straight down my spine. It sounded angry, or maybe curious, but in a predatory way. I turned slowly, my body stiff with fear, and that's when I saw it. Between the trees, there was a figure, tall, dark, and moving so fast, I almost didn't believe my eyes. It darted from one tree to another, and it was huge, way bigger than a person, and the way it moved wasn't human. It was fluid, almost like it was gliding, but with a power that made the hair on my arms stand up. I only saw it for a second, just a glimpse of something dark and shaggy, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Bear? No, bears don't move like that, and they're not that tall. Maybe a person in a costume? But out here? And why would anyone do that? It didn't make any sense. I was shaking now, my hands trembling so bad I could barely pick up the wrench. I forced myself to focus on the tire. I had to get out of there, fast. I fumbled with the lug nuts, my fingers slipping on the metal. Every few seconds, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing coming out of the woods. The silence was back, but it felt different now. Tense, like something was waiting, watching. I could feel eyes on me, and the back of my neck was prickling with sweat. I got the flat tire off, the weight of it making me stagger, and I leaned it against the truck bed. Then I grabbed the spare, heaving it into place. It was awkward, and I nearly dropped it, my arms shaking from adrenaline. As I started tightening the lug nuts, I heard a rustle in the leaves nearby. Not the wind. This was deliberate, something moving. I froze again, my breath catching. I didn't turn around, just listened, my whole body tense. The rustling stopped, but I could feel something there, just beyond the tree line. I worked faster, my hands cramping as I twisted the nuts one after another. I kept counting them in my head, 1, 2, 3, making sure I didn't miss any. My mind was screaming at me to hurry, to get the hell out of there. The light was fading more now, the shadows deepening, and the woods felt like they were closing in. I finished the last lug nut and reached for the jack to lower the truck. My hands were so sweaty, the jack handle slipped, and I dropped it with a clang that made me jump. I snatched it up, my heart pounding like a drum. I cranked the jack down, the truck settling with a groan. As soon as it was low enough, I yanked the jack out and threw it into the bed, not caring if it scratched anything. Then I grabbed the flat tire, heaved it into the back, and it landed with a thud that echoed in the quiet. I didn't even bother securing it. I just wanted to be gone. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my keys jangling in my shaky hand. I turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life, way louder than usual. I threw it into drive and peeled out, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back, not until I was a good 100 yards down the road. When I did glance in the rearview mirror, the woods were just a dark mass, nothing moving, but I could still feel that presence, like it was following me with its eyes. I sped up, the truck bouncing over the ruts, the spare tire whining in protest. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement, the smooth asphalt feeling like a relief after the rough gravel. As I drove, my hands were still shaking on the wheel, and I had to grip it tight to keep them steady. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that figure loping after me, but there was nothing. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen and heard. That scream, it was etched into my brain, a sound I knew I'd never forget. And that glimpse of something dark and fast, too big to be human, I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe it was a bear on its hind legs. But bears don't scream like that, and they don't move with that kind of speed, or a person. But why would anyone be out there, hiding in the trees, making sounds like that? It didn't add up. By the time I got home, the sun had set, and I was a wreck. I parked the truck and just sat there for a minute, my heart still racing. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and poured myself a drink, my hands so unsteady I spilled some. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise had me jumping, and I kept replaying it all in my head. Over the next few days, I thought about going back to see if there were any signs, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The fear was too real, too fresh. I've never driven down that road again. Even now, if I have to go anywhere near that area, I take the long way around. Sometimes, when I'm out in the woods or it's really quiet, I'll hear a sound that reminds me of that scream, and I'll freeze up all over again. I've looked up stuff online, read accounts from other people who've had similar experiences, and it's creepy how many stories match up. The screams, the tall figures, the feeling of being watched. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that in that isolated moment, something was out there with me, and the terror of it is forever ingrained. I just hope I never have to find out what it really was. Story 5. It was still dark when I woke up that morning, the kind of pitch black where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. I'd been planning this hunt for weeks. Colorado's archery elk season was in full swing, and I was determined to get away from the usual spots, the ones where you're tripping over other hunters every 500 yards. I'd heard whispers about this hanging valley, way out in central Colorado, a place so remote most guys couldn't be bothered with the brutal climb to get there. I'd lived in the state for years, spent more time in the woods than in my own living room, but this particular drainage I'd never set foot in. It was a blank spot on my mental map, and that's what drew me to it. I choked down a cold breakfast bar and washed it down with water that was already tasting like plastic from my hydration bladder. My truck was the only vehicle at the trailhead, a fact that was both satisfying and a little lonely. I did my final gear check by the dim dome light of the cab. Bow, release, arrows, binoculars, calls, knife. The usual. The air was cold, a real bite to it that promised a hard frost. I could see my breath pluming out in the weak light. I remember thinking it was a perfect morning for elk. The trail started climbing almost immediately, a steep, narrow elk trail that switchbacked up through a forest so thick and old it felt like stepping back in time. These weren't the scrappy, fiery growth pines you see a lot of places. This was old growth, massive trunks of Douglas fir and spruce, their branches creating a canopy so dense that even once the sun started thinking about rising, it stayed dark and close on the forest floor. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying needles. My headlamp beam cut a lonely tunnel through the blackness, the world reduced to just the circle of light and the sound of my own breathing and my boots crunching on the gravelly soil. It took me a good hour and a half of steady, lung-burning climbing before the terrain started to level out. The trees began to thin, and the first faint hint of grey dawn light was filtering down, enough that I could finally turn my headlamp off. And then I broke out of the trees into the hanging valley. It was like stepping into another world. The air changed instantly from that dry, piney smell to something wet and rich and alive. The ground underfoot went from firm to spongy. I was standing at the edge of a huge, swampy clearing, filled with tall, lush grass and these weird, stunted willow thickets. A low-lying mist clung to the ground, swirling around my knees. It was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a weight on your ears. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing, just the soft squelch of my boots in the soggy ground. I started moving along the edge of the clearing, staying in the tree line, looking for a good spot to set up and call, and that's when I saw the first thing that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a wallow, a place where elk roll in the mud. But it wasn't like any wallow I'd ever seen in my life. It wasn't a rough, torn-up patch of ground. This thing was almost perfectly rectangular, like someone had come out here with a shovel and dug a trench. The edges were sharp, the corners were squared off. The mud inside was dark and churned up, fresh. I remember just stopping and staring at it, my brain trying to make it make sense. An elk didn't make that. A bear wouldn't make that. It looked deliberate, man-made, but who the hell would be way out here in this impossible-to-reach valley, digging a perfect rectangle in the mud? It made no sense, and that little knot of confusion started to tighten in my gut. I pushed the thought aside. Maybe it was a weird natural formation, a trick of the light. I found a good spot about 100 yards further on, a little rise with some cover behind a fallen log that gave me a good view of a wide swath of the meadow. I nocked an arrow, more out of habit than anything, and settled in. The sun was finally cresting the ridge now, burning off the mist, and the valley was bathed in this beautiful golden morning light. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. I decided to try a call. I put my cow call to my lips and let out a soft, pleading mew. It's a sound that's supposed to sound like a lonely female elk, and it usually works like a charm. The sound hadn't even finished echoing when I heard something. It wasn't an echo, it was a response, a crash, not from in front of me where the meadow was, but from behind me and to my left, back in that thick, dark, old-growth forest I'd just climbed out of. It wasn't the careful, hesitant stepping of an elk. This was a full-on, no-holds-barred, crashing run. Something big was coming, and it was coming fast, plowing through the underbrush like it didn't care about noise at all. My heart just launched into my throat. I froze, every muscle locked tight. This was it. A bull was charging in, pissed off and ready to fight whatever he thought was stealing his cow. I gripped my bow so hard the cam dug into my palm. I turned my head slowly, painfully, trying to see into the dark wall of trees. The crashing got louder, closer. I could hear branches snapping, the sound getting bigger and bigger. It was maybe 50 yards out, then 30. I could feel the vibrations in the ground. This thing was a tank. I was ready for a massive bull elk to come exploding out of the tree line right on top of me, and then it stopped. Not like it slowed down. It didn't taper off. 1 second it was a deafening, earth-shaking charge, and the next second there was nothing. Total, absolute, dead silence. It was the silence that was the most terrifying part. Something that big, moving that fast, doesn't just stop on a dime. It can't. It has to skid, to stumble, to make some kind of sound. There was nothing. It was as if it had just vanished into thin air, or as if it had chosen to stop. My mind was racing. Did it see me? Did it smell me? The wind was in my face, it shouldn't have. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour, barely breathing, listening so hard my ears started to ring with the strain. Nothing. The forest was a silent, dark wall again. The knot in my gut was a hard, cold fist now. This wasn't right. None of this was right. After a long time, when my legs started to cramp from being stuck in one position, I slowly, carefully stood up. My knees were shaking. I knew I had to move. Staying in one spot felt too exposed now. I decided to do a slow loop, see if I could find any sign of what that had been. I started skirting the meadow again, moving from one patch of cover to the next, my senses on a razor's edge. Every little sound, a leaf falling, a distant drip of water, made me jump. That's when I found the second wallow. It was maybe 200 yards from the first one, nestled in a small dip near the trees, and it was just as wrong as the first, but in a different way. This one was a perfect cone shape, like a giant had stuck a traffic cone in the mud and pulled it out. The sides were smooth, almost polished, and the mud inside wasn't just churned. It was fresh, wet, glistening in the sun. It looked like it had been made minutes ago. The air around it had a smell too, a musky, heavy odor, like wet dog and old meat. It was faint, but it was there. A cold dread was starting to seep into my bones, replacing the initial spike of fear. This wasn't just weird anymore. This was feeling wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. I kept moving, trying to put distance between me and that cone-shaped pit, and that's when the knocking started. I took a step, thump. A single, solid, deep knock from the forest to my right. It sounded like someone hitting a dead tree with a big rock. I stopped dead, my breath caught in my chest. I took another cautious step. Thump. It matched my step. Exactly. I froze again, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to rationalize it. A woodpecker. No. This was too deep, too heavy, too deliberate. I took one more hesitant step. Thump. This one was louder, closer. It wasn't an echo. It was a response. Something was in there, and it was answering my footsteps. That's when the real primal fear set in. The kind that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your spine. This wasn't an animal going about its business. This was an intelligence. This was communication, or mockery, or a warning. I was terrified to move, terrified to stay. I was shaking all over, a fine, constant tremor I couldn't control. I had my binoculars in my hand, and I slowly, so slowly, it felt like my joints were rusted shut, raised them to my eyes. I scanned the tree line where the knocks had come from. The brush was thick, a tangled mess of young pines and serviceberry. At first I didn't see anything, just shadows and leaves. Then I saw movement, a shift in the pattern. I focused the glasses, my hands trembling so badly the image jumped and swam. And then I saw it. Through a small gap in the branches, I saw a patch of grayish-black hair. Thick, matted, like a grizzly's, but different. Longer. I adjusted my grip, holding my breath, trying to steady the view. The gap in the brush was small, but it was enough. I saw a torso, massive, covered in that same dark hair, a shoulder thick and rounded, more like a man's than a bear's, an arm long and powerfully built, and a hand. It was the hand that made my blood turn to ice water. It wasn't a paw, it was a hand, a huge, dark, five-fingered hand wrapped around the end of a log. The log was as thick as my thigh, and the arm was moving, pulling the log back and then swinging it forward in a smooth, powerful, terrifyingly human-like motion. Crack. The sound was immense, a sharp report that echoed through the valley as the log struck a dead, barkless snag. The whole tree shuddered with the impact. In that single, crystal-clear moment, every weird piece of the morning, the rectangular wallow, the silent charge, the cone-shaped pit, the answering knocks, clicked into place with a final, horrifying certainty. This wasn't a bear, this wasn't an elk. This was the thing from the stories, the thing you laugh about around a campfire, Bigfoot. The sight of it, the sheer, impossible reality of it, broke something in me. The fear turned into pure, unadulterated panic, a flight response so strong it overrode every other thought. I didn't think. I just ran. I turned and I bolted. I wasn't quiet. I wasn't careful. I crashed through the willows, my bow smacking against branches, my feet slipping in the muddy grass. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran for the nearest game trail that looked like it headed downhill. I heard one more tremendous crack from behind me, and then nothing. No pursuit. No sound at all except the ragged sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my feet. The trail was steep and treacherous, but I flew down it, half falling, half running, grabbing onto saplings to keep from tumbling head over heels. I had one singular burning thought: get out, get out, get out. About halfway down, the trail skirted another small, stagnant-looking pool of water, tucked right up against a rock face. The smell hit me before I even saw it properly. It was rancid, a gut-churning stench of rot and decay that was 100 times stronger than the musky smell from the wallow. The water was black and scummy, and the surface was absolutely crawling with flies, a shimmering, buzzing carpet of them. I didn't stop. I held my breath and ran past, the smell clinging to the back of my throat, making me want to gag. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the trees and saw my truck, sitting alone and beautiful in the trailhead parking lot. I scrambled inside, locked the doors, and just sat there, my whole body shaking uncontrollably, my chest heaving. I sat like that for a long time, just staring at the tree line, expecting to see that massive grey-black figure step out of the shadows. I drove back to my camp in a daze. I didn't even bother taking my gear off. I just sat in my camp chair, staring into the fire I'd built too big, too desperate for light and warmth. I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. Every snap of a twig in the fire, every rustle of the wind in the pines, sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I had my rifle across my lap the whole time, my finger never far from the trigger guard. The woods, the Colorado wilderness I'd loved and trusted my whole life, had become a different place. It felt ancient and deep, and like it was hiding things I was never supposed to see. That feeling hasn't ever really left me. I still go out, I still hunt, but it's different now. I'm always listening, always watching the shadows, because I know with a cold certainty that I'm not always the hunter, and that out there, in the quiet, remote places, there are things that walk on two legs that don't belong in any book, any story, any sane person's world. I saw one, and I can never unsee that hand, holding that log, moving with a grace that was never meant for the woods. Story 6. We got there in the late afternoon. The air was thick and hot, the kind of wet heat that makes your shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you get out of the car. The mosquitoes were already out in force, a constant whining cloud. We'd built this little shelter a few trips back, a real half-assed thing, made from some scrap plywood we'd hauled in, nailed between a couple of pine trees. It was more of a lean-to than a cabin, just big enough for the two of us to lay our sleeping bags down side by side. It kept the rain off mostly. About 100 yards away, through a thin screen of trees, you could see the lake, flat and dark and still. We spent the evening like any other kids would. We built a fire pit with some loose rocks, cooked some hot dogs that got a little charred on the outside but were still cold in the middle, and just talked junk. Talked about girls, about cars, about what we were going to do after high school, normal stuff, the kind of stuff that feels so important when you're that age and so stupidly small later on. As it got dark, the woods got loud, not in a scary way, just in a living way. Crickets, frogs, the occasional splash from the lake. We doused the fire with a couple of buckets of lake water around maybe 11 o'clock, the steam hissing up and smelling like wet ash, and we crawled into the shelter and into our sleeping bags. I remember lying there for a while, listening to the sounds, feeling the lumpy ground through my sleeping bag before I finally drifted off. My friend was snoring lightly next to me. It was a comfortable sound. It meant I wasn't alone. I don't know what woke me up. There wasn't a loud noise, not at first. It was more like a shift in the air, a change in the pressure. I opened my eyes, and it was that deep, solid black you only get in the woods, miles from any town. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I just lay there, listening. The night sounds had stopped. The crickets were silent. The frogs were silent. It was dead quiet. And that was the first thing that sent a little trickle of ice water down my spine. You don't realize how much noise a forest makes at night until it all just stops. Then I heard it. A stick snapped. Not a little twig, but a proper branch, a dry cracking sound that echoed in the silence. It was close, too close. My heart, which had been beating slow and steady from sleep, suddenly kicked into a frantic hammering against my ribs. I held my breath, my ears straining. Another snap and another. It was a rhythm. It was footsteps. Something big was walking around our camp. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my joints were rusted shut, turned my head on my pillow. The opening of our shelter faced the clearing where we'd had the fire and where I'd parked my pride and joy, my Honda 350 motorcycle. My dad had helped me buy it, and it was my ticket to freedom. It was maybe 20 feet away from our shelter. My eyes were starting to adjust to the dark, just enough to see shapes, the deeper black of the trees against the slightly less black of the sky. And then I saw a shape move. It detached itself from the tree line, a massive, solid blackness that was even darker than the surrounding night. It was huge. I'm not talking tall, I'm talking thick and wide and heavy. It just stood there for a second, and I could feel its presence. A kind of weight in the air that pressed down on me. I couldn't breathe. I think I forgot how. Then it started walking. It didn't lumber or shuffle. Its walk was purposeful, direct. It walked straight towards my motorcycle. My stomach dropped into my shoes. This thing, whatever it was heading right for my bike. I had to wake up my friend. I was paralyzed, but I knew I couldn't be the only one seeing this. I slid my hand over, found his face in the dark, and clamped my hand over his mouth. He jerked awake, his body tensing. I felt his muffled question against my palm. I put my lips right against his ear. My voice was a dry, terrified whisper, so low I could barely hear it myself. "Look," I breathed. "Out there. Look." I took my hand away from his mouth. He was breathing in short, ragged pants. I could feel the tremor running through him. We were both shaking. "What is that?" he whispered back, his voice cracking with fear. "I don't know," I said, and it was the absolute truth. My mind was racing through possibilities. A bear? No, bears don't walk like that. They're more animal. This thing walked almost like a man, but it was all wrong. The proportions were off. It was too big, its arms were too long. But as soon as it leaves, we're getting out of here. We're going to the bike and we're leaving. We both watched, frozen, as the creature reached my Honda. It stopped beside it. It was so close I could see the details now, silhouetted against the faint starlight reflecting off the chrome of the bike. It was covered in hair, or fur. It wasn't shaggy like a bear, but thick, and in the minimal light, it looked like a reddish-brown color, like wet clay. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly broad. Then it did something that chills me to this day, something that makes no sense. It bent over the seat of my motorcycle. It didn't just lean down, it folded itself at the waist, bringing its chest to about 2 feet above the seat. Its head was right over the handlebars, and it reached out with one of its hands. I saw the hand, big and dark, and it started touching the bike. Not hitting it, not tearing at it, touching it. It ran its fingers over the seat. The vinyl. It touched the chrome of the fender, then the rubber of the grip on the handlebar. It was exploring, it was curious, it was studying my motorcycle like it had never seen one before. The silence was still absolute, broken only by the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears and the soft, almost inaudible sound of its fingers brushing against the metal and vinyl. This went on for what felt like an hour. It was probably only a minute or two, but time had lost all meaning. We were prisoners in that little plywood shack, watching a nightmare conduct a quiet, terrifying inspection of our only way out. I kept thinking, if it looks over here, if it sees us, that's it. We're dead. There was no doubt in my mind. This thing was powerful. You could feel the raw strength coming off it in waves. Finally, it straightened up. It just stood up to its full, terrifying height. It turned its head, not towards us, thank God, but back the way it came. And then it walked back towards the tree line. And it didn't go around the brush and the undergrowth, it just pushed through it. I saw saplings, thick bushes, just get shoved aside like they were nothing. It didn't make a sound. No cracking branches now, no rustling leaves. It just melted back into the darkness, and the woods were silent again. We didn't move. We lay there, trembling, for what felt like forever. My friend finally broke the silence, his whisper barely audible. "Is it gone?" "I think so," I whispered back. My throat was so dry it hurt to talk. "We have to go, now," he said. I agreed. We had a plan. We'd wait 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes to be sure it was really gone. We counted the seconds in our heads, each one stretching out into an eternity. The forest sounds hadn't come back. The silence was a heavy blanket smothering us. After what we decided was 10 minutes, we moved. We slid out of our sleeping bags as quietly as we could. We didn't bother with anything else. Our backpacks, the cooler, the fishing gear, it was all staying. We just wanted to get to the bike. We crept out of the shelter, staying low to the ground. The dirt was cool and damp under my bare hands. Every shadow was that thing. Every rustle of a leaf was it coming back. We reached the Honda. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I swung my leg over the seat. My friend climbed on the back, his hands gripping my shoulders so hard it hurt. "Just go, man, just go," he pleaded into my ear. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life, and the sound was explosively loud in the silence. I didn't wait for it to warm up. I kicked it into gear, twisted the throttle, and we shot off down the dirt track. I didn't have my helmet. The wind whipped tears from my eyes. I didn't look back. I just focused on the path in front of me, driving faster than was safe, bouncing over ruts, the headlight beam jerking wildly across the trees. We didn't say a single word the whole way to my house. We got there just as the sky was starting to lighten from black to deep blue. My dad was already up, having his coffee in the kitchen. He took one look at our pale, wide-eyed faces and knew something was wrong. We told him. We stumbled over our words, talking about the silence, the size of it, the way it touched the bike. He listened, his face getting more and more skeptical. "So you just left all your gear out there?" he finally said, his voice tight. "Your brand new sleeping bag, the fishing rods I lent you? You just took off and left hundreds of dollars of stuff because you got spooked by a bear?" "It wasn't a bear, Dad," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I sounded like a scared kid. "I don't care what it was," he said, getting angry now. "You don't just abandon your things. We're going back, right now. You're gonna get your gear." I felt a fresh wave of terror wash over me. Go back? No, absolutely not. But my dad wasn't having it. He was a practical man, a man who didn't believe in monsters in the woods. To him, this was a case of boys letting their imaginations run away with them and costing him money. 20 minutes later, we were in his car, the three of us, heading back down that dirt road. The sun was fully up now, and the woods looked completely different. Normal, benign birds were singing. It was hard to believe the terror of just a few hours ago had happened in this same place. My dad had the high beams on even though it was daylight, cutting bright paths through the shadows under the trees. He pulled the car right up to the edge of the clearing, pointing the headlights directly at our little shelter. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. The dead fire pit, the sleeping bag still unrolled inside the shelter, our backpacks leaning against a tree. "See?" my dad said. "Nothing. Now go get your stuff. Be quick about it." My friend and I looked at each other. The fear was back, a cold knot in my stomach. Neither of us wanted to get out of that car. "You," my dad said, pointing at my friend. You go get it. He pointed at me, can stay here with me. I could see the protest die on my friend's face. He was terrified, but he was also scared of my dad. He slowly, reluctantly, opened the car door. The sound of the door opening seemed too loud. He got out and started walking towards the shelter, his steps slow and hesitant. He kept looking around, his head on a swivel, scanning the tree line. I sat in the passenger seat, my knuckles white where I was gripping the dashboard. My dad sat stoically, arms crossed, watching. I scanned the woods, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. It was so quiet except for the car's engine ticking as it cooled. My friend reached the shelter. He bent down, grabbed his backpack and his sleeping bag, then mine. He was moving faster now, spurred by pure fear. He turned to come back, his arms full of gear, and that's when I saw it. Back in the trees, maybe 50 yards behind the shelter, where the shadows were still deep and thick from the canopy, something moved. It was just a shift in the darkness, a patch of deeper shadow that detached itself for a second. I couldn't see any details, not in the daylight and from that distance, but I saw the color. A flash of that same slightly red-brown fur. It was just standing there, watching us. It had been there the whole time. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It was just observing. Watching my friend scramble back to the car with our things. Watching me, a petrified statue in the passenger seat. Watching my dad, who was completely oblivious, staring straight ahead. My friend threw the gear into the back seat and practically leaped into the car, slamming the door shut. Go, Mr. Henderson, please, just go, he begged, his voice high and tight. My dad sighed, like this was all a huge inconvenience, and put the car in reverse. He backed up, turned around, and started driving us back down the dirt track. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell him what I saw. I just stared out the window, back towards that spot in the trees until it was out of sight. My friend was breathing in huge, gulping gasps next to me. We never talked about it much after that. What was there to say? We both knew what we saw. We both knew it wasn't a bear. We knew it was curious, and we knew it was still there watching us, even in the bright light of a Florida morning. My dad thought we were just a couple of foolish, frightened boys, but we knew the truth. We had gone into the woods as kids, and we had come out knowing that the world was a much bigger and much stranger and much more terrifying place than we had ever imagined. And sometimes the things in the dark are just as curious about us as we are afraid of them. I still have that Honda sitting in my garage. I haven't ridden it in years. Story 7. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before. But I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I'm still shaking just thinking about it, and I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I have to share it. My husband and I were driving home late from a family barbecue at my cousin's place. It was one of those long, lazy summer days that just drags on, and we ended up staying way later than we meant to. By the time we left, it was pitch black out. No moon or anything, just this heavy darkness that felt like it was pressing in on the truck. We live out in the country, down a dirt road that's mostly surrounded by woods, and our driveway is this long, tree-lined thing that arches over like a tunnel. I've always thought it was kind of creepy at night, but that night, it felt worse than usual. Maybe it was because we were both tired, or maybe it was the couple of beers my husband had. But the air felt thick, you know, like something was off. I remember leaning my head against the window, feeling the cool glass on my forehead, and just watching the trees whip by in the headlights. The radio was playing some soft rock station low, but I wasn't really listening. I was just zoning out, thinking about how nice it was to see everyone, but also how ready I was to be home and in bed. My husband was driving, and he's usually pretty calm, but even he seemed a little on edge. He'd been quiet for most of the drive, which isn't like him. We were maybe 5 minutes from the house when we turned onto our driveway. The headlights cut through the darkness, and that's when it happened. Out of nowhere, this massive figure stepped out from the trees on the left. I mean, it was huge. like bigger than anything I've ever seen in my life. It moved across the light in 3 or 4 powerful strides, and for a second, everything just froze. I can still see it in my mind, clear as day. It was tall, really tall, with shoulders so wide they nearly filled the space between 2 large trees. Its hair was long and grey, hanging down to its knees, and it was coarse and tangled like it had been out in the elements for years. There was this faint silver shimmer to it in the headlights, almost like it was wet or covered in dew. The way it moved was smooth but heavy, like it weighed a ton, and it didn't even look at us, just crossed the driveway and disappeared into the brush on the other side. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My husband slammed on the brakes so hard that the truck jerked to a stop, and I lurched forward, my seatbelt digging into my shoulder. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, staring at the spot where it had been. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears, and my hands were trembling. I remember grabbing the dashboard, my knuckles white, and just holding on like I was afraid the truck might tip over. The engine was still running, and the headlights were still on, illuminating the empty driveway ahead. But there was nothing there now, just the darkness and the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. I could feel the cold sweat on my back, and my breath was coming in short, shaky gasps. I looked over at my husband, and his face was pale, almost ghostly in the dashboard light. He had this wide-eyed, stunned expression, like he'd just seen a ghost. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I just nodded, too scared to speak. My throat felt tight, like I was choking on the air. We both kept staring out the windshield, waiting for it to come back, for something else to happen, but nothing did. The woods were silent, except for the faint hum of the engine and the sound of our breathing. After what felt like forever, maybe a minute or 2, my husband slowly put the truck back in drive and started creeping forward. He didn't speed up. He just inched along, like he was afraid we might run into it again. I kept my eyes glued to the trees on either side, scanning for any movement, any sign of it. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up, and my skin was crawling with this intense, primal fear. It was the kind of fear that sinks deep into your bones, the kind that makes you want to curl up and hide. We finally made it to the house, and my husband pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. For a few seconds, we just sat there in the dark, not moving. The silence was deafening. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and my heart was still racing. I remember fumbling for the door handle, my hand so shaky I could barely grip it. When I got out, the night air felt cold against my skin, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop trembling. My legs felt weak like jelly, and I had to lean against the truck for a second to steady myself. My husband came around to my side, and he put his arm around me, but he was shaking too. We didn't say anything as we walked to the house. We just hurried inside and locked the door behind us. Once we were in, we both let out this breath we'd been holding, and I sank onto the couch, feeling exhausted but too wired to sleep. The living room was dark, except for the glow from the streetlight outside, and it felt safe, but also kind of hollow, like the fear had followed us in. We ended up sitting there for hours just talking about what we saw. My husband kept going over it again and again, like he was trying to make sense of it. It was so big, he said, his voice low and serious. And that hair, I've never seen anything like it. It was grey, almost silver, and it moved like it was heavy, but fast. I nodded, adding my own details. I told him about how the shoulders were so broad they almost touched the trees on either side, and how the hair hung down in thick, matted clumps. We both agreed that it wasn't a bear or a person. It was something else entirely. I've heard stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch before, mostly from old-timers in the area or stuff online, but they always described them as dark or red-brown. This thing was different. The grey hair made me think it might be older, like it had been around for a long time, and the way it moved, it wasn't clumsy or slow. It was powerful and deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. That's what scared me the most, I think. It didn't seem afraid of us or the truck. It just did what it wanted and vanished. We talked until the sun started to come up, and even then we couldn't sleep. Every little noise outside made us jump. A branch tapping against the window, the wind whistling through the cracks. I kept getting up to look out the curtains, half expecting to see it standing there in the yard, but there was nothing. The woods were just woods again, dark and quiet, but now they felt menacing, like they were hiding secrets I never wanted to know. We haven't told many people about this because, let's be honest, most folks around here would laugh or say we were drunk or seeing things, but we know what we saw. It's changed how I feel about the woods, about the dark. I used to love sitting on the porch at night, listening to the crickets, but now I can't do it without feeling this knot in my stomach. Every time I drive down that driveway, I slow way down, my eyes scanning the trees, waiting for something to step out again. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but that image is burned into my brain. The massive shape, the grey hair shimmering in the headlights, the way it moved like it owned the place. It's left me with this lingering sense of unease, this feeling that the world is bigger and stranger than I thought, and that sometimes the quiet darkness after sunset isn't so quiet after all. Story 8. It was one of those hot, sticky summer mornings in the mid-80s. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your t-shirt cling to your back before you've even broken a sweat. My friend and I, we were maybe 16 or 17 at the time, restless and bored with the usual haunts around our Pennsylvania town. We decided to go deep into Curry Hollow, a place we knew had some rugged spots, but we were feeling adventurous. We parked his beat-up Chevy pickup on the gravel shoulder of the road, the engine ticking as it cooled. The woods loomed ahead, a solid wall of green. We'd brought some climbing rope, just a couple of lengths we'd cobbled together, because we'd heard there was a serious incline deeper in, a place we'd never tried to get down before. The plan was simple: get to the bottom, see what was there, and get back before the afternoon heat really set in. The hike in was familiar for the first few hundred yards. We followed a faint deer trail, the ground soft with last year's leaves. The sunlight was dappled, cutting through the canopy in sharp, bright shafts. It was quiet, the way deep woods are quiet, just the buzz of insects and the occasional scuffle of a squirrel. We joked around, our voices too loud in the stillness, talking about nothing, about girls, about the crappy jobs we had for the summer. After about 400 yards, the ground just dropped away. It wasn't a cliff, but it was a steep, nasty slope, maybe 60 or 70 feet down, all loose shale and dirt and tangled roots. You couldn't just walk down it. This was why we'd brought the ropes. We found a sturdy-looking oak tree right at the edge, its roots clawing into the dirt, and we tied one end of our rope around its thick trunk. We threw the other end over the edge. It uncoiled, slapping against the hillside before disappearing into the ferns below. Going down was a slow, careful process. The rope was rough on my hands, even through my gloves. I could feel the grit of the dirt and the bark digging into my palms. My friend went first, and I listened to the sound of his boots scraping against the earth, the small showers of pebbles he dislodged. Then it was my turn. I remember the feeling of hanging there, my weight on the rope, my feet trying to find purchase on the unstable wall of dirt. The air got cooler and damper the further down I went. When my feet finally hit the flat ground at the bottom, it felt like we'd entered another world. The light was different down there, greener, gloomier. The sounds from the top were gone, replaced by a deeper, more enclosed silence. We stood there for a minute, just getting our bearings. It was unfamiliar territory. We'd never been this far into this particular part of the hollow. The ground was spongy with moss and decades of leaf litter. There were massive ancient trees, their trunks so wide I couldn't have wrapped my arms around them. We started walking, not really going anywhere specific, just exploring. The air was so still, our footsteps were muffled, but they still seemed too loud. That's when we saw the deadfall. It was a huge pile of downed trees, a real tangled mess, all covered in a thick blanket of vines that looked like a green shag carpet. It was a wall of wood and leaves, maybe 10 feet high, and right near the base of it, about 10 feet ahead of us, was this shape. It was hunched over, a big rounded hump. It had hair, a shaggy dark brown coat like a wet bear. My first thought, my only thought in that split second, was that it was a bear. A big black bear, maybe injured, just hunkered down. My heart jumped into my throat. We both froze. We knew you don't run from a bear. You back away slowly. You don't startle it. I could feel my friend tense up beside me. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. We made eye contact, a silent, panicked agreement to get the hell out of there. We started to turn, moving as slowly and quietly as we could, trying not to make a single sound. I remember focusing on placing my foot down carefully, avoiding a dry twig. My whole world had shrunk to that one movement, turn and retreat. And that's when it stood up. It didn't rise like a person stretches after sitting. It didn't groan or make a sound. It just unfolded. It was so fast, a single fluid motion that defied its size. 1 second it was a huddled mass on the ground, and the next it was towering. And I mean towering. We weren't short kids. We were both around 5'10". This thing had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its head was blocky and its shoulders were impossibly broad. The shaggy brown hair covered it completely. It didn't look at us. It was just there, now upright. The terror that hit me in that moment was a physical thing. It was a cold wave that started in my gut and shot out to my fingers and toes, turning them to ice. It wasn't the calculated fear of seeing a bear. This was pure, primal, mindless terror. This was wrong. Bears don't stand up like that and just stay standing. They might rear up for a second, but they drop back down. This thing was balanced. It was on 2 legs. For a heartbeat, maybe 2, nothing happened. The 3 of us were frozen in this bizarre tableau. Then it bolted. It didn't run on all 4s. It ran on 2 legs, and it wasn't a clumsy, loping run. It was powerful, explosive. It took off away from us, crashing into the brush, and the sound was unbelievable. It wasn't just the sound of something big moving through the woods. It was a crashing, snapping, tearing sound. It was like a truck was plowing through the trees. I saw saplings thick as my wrist just get bowled over. They didn't bend. They snapped. The force of it, the raw power, was terrifying. It covered 20 yards, a solid stretch of thick undergrowth, in a few seconds, less than that. It was just a blur of brown and a wave of destruction receding into the deeper woods. The spell broke. The panic was absolute. There was no thought, no plan. There was only run. We spun around and sprinted back the way we came. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life, before or since. My lungs were burning, my legs were pumping, but I didn't feel any of it. All I felt was the blind, screaming need to get to that rope. The woods, which had been so quiet, were now a deafening roar in my head. The sound of my own heartbeat, my ragged gasps for air, and the crashing sound of that thing still echoing, even though it was gone. We reached the base of the slope. The rope was there hanging, our lifeline. My friend went up first, and he scrambled. He didn't climb. He hauled himself up hand over hand, his feet kicking wildly against the dirt. I was right behind him, my hands on the rope before he was even halfway up. I was looking back over my shoulder the whole time, expecting to see that massive shape bearing down on us. The feeling of being exposed, of having my back to those woods, was pure agony. When it was my turn, I jumped for the rope. My gloves were slick with sweat. I pulled myself up, my arms screaming in protest. I was not a weak kid. I worked on a farm. But this was a different kind of strength, the strength of pure fear. I dug my toes into the hillside, scrambling, sending showers of dirt and stones down into the gloom below. I didn't look down. I just looked up, at the edge, at the sunlight, at safety. We collapsed at the top, lying on the ground, gasping for air. Our chests were heaving. We were both covered in dirt and sweat. We didn't speak for a long time. We just lay there listening. The normal wood sounds were back, the birds, the insects. It was like we'd crossed back into our own world. We finally sat up and looked at each other. His face was pale, his eyes wide. I'm sure I looked the same. We still didn't say anything. What was there to say? We just got up, gathered the rope with shaking hands, and started walking back to the truck. We didn't run, but we walked fast, constantly looking behind us. The ride back to town was completely silent. The radio was off. We just stared out the windshield. The normalcy of the paved road, the houses, the people mowing their lawns felt alien and surreal. We pulled into his driveway and he finally spoke. What the hell was that? His voice was quiet, shaky. I just shook my head. I had no answer. We couldn't leave it alone, though. The fear was being slowly replaced by a gnawing, obsessive curiosity. Had we really seen that? It felt like a dream, a bad one, but the dirt under my fingernails and the raw burn on my palms from the rope were real. Later that same afternoon, we went back. We brought 3 other guys with us, friends we trusted. We told them we'd seen something weird, something big. We didn't say what. We just said we needed to go back down there. The 5 of us went back to the spot. Tying the rope to the same tree felt eerie. Going back down that slope was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made my heart skip. We got to the bottom, and the 5 of us moved cautiously towards the deadfall. The silence was back, heavier than before. We found the spot. There was no mistaking it. The path of destruction was still there, a clear lane of smashed and broken bushes and young trees leading away from the deadfall. It was like a bulldozer had driven through. We walked over to where the thing had been hunched over. The ground was matted down. It wasn't just a spot where an animal had lain down. It was a cleared area, almost like a nest or a bed, a deer bed, but way, way too big. The impression in the moss and leaves was long, longer than a man. We searched the ground for tracks. We spent probably 20 minutes on our hands and knees scouring the area. The ground was soft and should have held a print perfectly, but there was nothing. No clear tracks, no claw marks, nothing. It was as if it had never been there at all, except for the violent, undeniable evidence of its escape route. One of the other guys pointed at the broken saplings. "Nothing around here did that," he said, his voice low. "A bear couldn't. It wouldn't." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We all knew. We climbed back up and drove home. We made a pact not to talk about it, not to anyone. Who would believe us? We'd sound insane. For years, I kept it secret. I pushed it down, locked it away, but I never forgot it. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times. I've read about bears. I've looked at pictures. It wasn't a bear. A bear is powerful, sure, but it doesn't move like that. It doesn't stand to its full height and then sprint on 2 legs with that kind of speed and coordination. The gait was all wrong. The proportions were all wrong. The sheer, silent power of it was all wrong. What gets me, even now, all these years later, isn't just the size of it or the way it ran. It's the way it stood up, that single, silent, effortless movement. It was the moment the world I knew stopped making sense. One second it was an animal, the next it was something else entirely. And then it was just gone, leaving nothing behind but a trail of broken trees and a fear that has never really left me. I still don't know what it was. I just know what I saw. Story 9. All right. So this is something I've carried with me for over 30 years now, and I've never really talked about it much outside of a few close people who just kind of nod and change the subject, but I need to get it out. because it still messes with my head when I think about it. This happened back in the fall of 1989 in southern Ohio. Me and two buddies, let's call them Dave and Mike, were on a deer hunting trip, and Mike brought along his teenage son, who was maybe 15 or 16 at the time. I'll just refer to him as the kid, because that's how I thought of him then, and it feels weird using his name here. We'd driven out to this spot deep in the woods, a place Dave knew from his uncle, who swore it was packed with deer. It was supposed to be a quiet, easy weekend. Just guys, some beer, and hopefully a buck or two. The first day was normal, setting up camp, joking around, the kid being all excited about his first real hunting trip. We had a couple of tents pitched in a small clearing with a fire pit in the middle, and the trees were thick all around us. It felt isolated, but familiar, you know, like any other camping trip. Then came that afternoon. It had been drizzling on and off all day, not heavy rain, just that misty, cold kind that seeps into your bones. The others had gone out to hunt, Dave, Mike, and the kid, while I stayed back at camp. I was tired from the drive and just wanted to rest for a bit, maybe tend to the fire. At first, everything was fine. I could hear the usual forest sounds, birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the leaves, the distant tap-tap of the drizzle on the tent canvas. But then, slowly, it all just stopped. I don't mean it got quieter. I mean it went dead silent, like someone flipped a switch. 1 minute, there was life all around, and the next, nothing. No birds, no wind, not even the drizzle seemed to make a sound anymore. It was eerie as hell. I remember sitting there by the smoldering fire, feeling this chill crawl up my spine. I've been in the woods plenty of times, and silence isn't unusual. But this was different. It was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood up and looked around, but everything was still. The trees were just standing there, dripping wet, and the only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe a predator was nearby, a bear or something. But even then, you usually hear something. This was absolute. I went back into the tent and just sat there, listening, but the silence pressed in on me. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. After a while, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, it was dark outside, and the others were back. They'd come in quietly, which was weird because usually they'd be laughing or talking about the hunt. Dave said they hadn't seen anything, not even a squirrel, and Mike mentioned how the woods felt off. The kid was pale and didn't say much, just huddled by the fire when we got it going again. We ate dinner, some canned beans and hot dogs, and the mood was tense. Nobody wanted to admit it, but we all felt it. The silence was still there, broken only by the crackle of the fire and our own voices, which sounded too loud in the stillness. We turned in early, hoping sleep would reset things. The tents were set up close together, with me and the kid in one, and Dave and Mike in the other. I remember zipping up the tent flap, feeling the damp cold seeping through the fabric, and lying down in my sleeping bag. The kid was already asleep, or pretending to be, and I could hear his steady breathing. Outside, the drizzle had picked up a little, but it was still that same unnatural quiet. I must have fallen asleep because what woke me up was this sound. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps crunching on the wet leaves outside. At first, I thought it was one of the guys getting up to take a leak, but then I realized the steps were too heavy, too deliberate. They weren't human. I lay there, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps circled the tent, slow and steady, like whatever it was knew exactly where we were. Then I heard this deep, rumbling breathing. It wasn't like a person breathing, it was lower, guttural, like air being forced in and out of a big chest. I could feel the vibrations through the ground. Next to me, the kid stirred. I heard him whisper, so soft I almost missed it. Something touched me. His voice was trembling. I turned my head and saw his eyes wide open in the dark, fixed on the tent wall, Through the fabric, he whispered again. It felt hairy. That's when the fear really set in. We all froze. I could hear Dave and Mike in the other tent, and I knew they were awake too because the footsteps were loud enough to wake the dead. Then this smell hit us. It was musky, earthy, like wet soil, and something else I can't describe, almost like old meat or decay. It filled the tent, thick and suffocating. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move, but I knew we had to do something. I fumbled for the flashlight I kept by my sleeping bag. My fingers were numb with cold and fear. I whispered to the kid to stay put, and I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, swinging wildly because my hand was trembling. I scanned the area around the tents, but there was nothing. No footprints, no movement, just the same oppressive silence and the drizzle. The smell was still there, though, strong as ever. I called out softly, "Hello," but no answer. It felt stupid even saying it, like I was inviting something. After a minute, I zipped the tent back up and told the kid it was probably an animal, but I didn't believe it. Neither did he. We sat there in the dark, listening, but the footsteps had stopped. The breathing was gone too. For a while, it was just us and that smell and the sound of our own ragged breaths. Dave shouted from the other tent, asking if we were okay, and I yelled back that we were fine. But my voice cracked. We all knew we weren't fine. Time dragged on, and eventually the kid fell back asleep, or at least pretended to. I couldn't. My mind was racing, going over every possible explanation. Bear, coyote, even a prank, but none of it fit. Bears don't move that quietly, or have breathing that deep. And who the hell would be out here messing with us? We were miles from anywhere. After what felt like hours, I had to pee. Badly. I didn't want to go out, but the pressure was building, and I figured if I was quick, it'd be okay. I grabbed the flashlight again and slowly unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cold. The air was damp and chill, and the drizzle had lightened to a fine mist. I shone the flashlight around, half expecting to see nothing again, but this time I saw it. Between two trees, maybe 20 yards away, was this tall, bulky figure. It was standing perfectly still, but I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. The beam of my flashlight caught it, and for a second I thought it was a man, but no, it was too big, too broad. It had to be over 7 feet tall, with shoulders that looked like they could carry a small car. Its shape was human-like, but wrong, like it was stretched and thickened. I couldn't make out any features because it was backlit by the darkness, but I could see the outline, and that chest moving slowly, rhythmically. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I just stood there, flashlight shaking in my hand, staring at this thing. Then it took a step toward me. Not fast, but deliberate, like it was testing the ground. That's when I snapped out of it. My training kicked in. I'd been hunting since I was a kid, and I raised my gun. It was a rifle I'd left leaning against the tent, and my hands were so unsteady I almost dropped it. I didn't aim. I just held it up, pointing in its direction. I didn't even have a round chambered, but I hoped the gesture would scare it off. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could hear my own heart pounding, and the musky smell was stronger than ever, like it was coming from right there. Then, without a sound, it turned. Not like a person turns, but fluidly, almost gracefully, and it vanished into the trees. I mean, 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. No rustle, no crunch of leaves, just gone. I stood there for what felt like forever, guns still raised, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The forest was silent again, and the smell started to fade. I finally lowered the gun, my arms aching from tension, and I hurried back into the tent. I didn't even bother peeing. I just zipped myself in and sat there shaking. The kid was awake, and he asked if I saw anything. I lied and said no, but he knew. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, listening, waiting for the footsteps to return. but they never did. When morning came, it was grey and damp, but the silence had lifted. Birds were chirping again, and the forest felt normal. We all crawled out of our tents, looking like hell. Dave and Mike asked what happened, and I told them everything. We decided to check the area where I'd seen the figure, and there they were. Footprints, huge, deep impressions in the mud, bigger than any boot I've ever seen. They were shaped like a human foot, but wider, with toes that looked almost splayed. We followed them for a bit, but they disappeared into the undergrowth after a few yards. That was it for us. We packed up in record time, not even bothering with breakfast. The drive home was quiet, nobody saying much. The kid looked out the window the whole time, and I could tell he was scared shitless. We never went back to that spot, and we never talked about it again after that trip. But I've never forgotten it. The memory of that slow, deep breathing, the earthy smell, and the way it moved. It haunts me. Even now, decades later, if I'm in the woods and it gets too quiet, I get this knot in my stomach. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to. Some things are better left unexplained. Story 10. Okay, I'll just come out and say it. I saw something that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and it's been living in my head rent-free for years now. I've got a degree in sociology and anthropology from Central Michigan University, so my whole thing is observing people, understanding cultures, and looking at things with a logical, analytical eye. I'm not a guy who believes in monsters, or I guess I wasn't. This happened years ago, back when my daughter was 10. We'd been at a birthday gathering for my uncle at his house, which is out in a more rural part of the county. It's one of those areas where the houses aren't on top of each other. There are lots of old trees, and the night gets really, really dark. The kind of dark where you can't see your own hand in front of your face if there's no moon. We were the last ones to leave. My wife was in the passenger seat, my daughter was buckled in the back, and I was behind the wheel. I remember the inside of the car still smelled faintly of birthday cake and coffee. We were all tired, you know, that pleasant, worn-out feeling after a long day with family. I was just focused on the simple task of backing the car out of the long gravel driveway. My uncle's neighbor lived in a trailer home really close to the road, and their bedroom window faced the driveway. They were older folks and went to bed early. As a courtesy, whenever I left at night, I'd back out with my headlights off until I was pointed down the road. It was just a habit, a small thing to be a good neighbor. So that's what I did. I put the car in reverse, clicked off the headlights, and started backing out slowly, using the glow of the porch light behind me and the faint ambient light from a distant street lamp to see. The car was almost completely sideways in the driveway, my front end pointing east towards the neighbor's property, when my wife gasped. It wasn't a loud gasp, more like a sharp intake of breath that got stuck in her throat. My eyes, which had been focused on the rearview mirror, snapped forward, and that's when we all saw it. Coming from the east, from the dark field next to my uncle's property, was a figure. It was big. That's the first thing that registered, just immense. It was striding, not walking, towards the road. Its motion was what got me first. It wasn't a human walk. A human walk has a bounce, a shift in the shoulders, a little bit of wobble. This was smooth, powerful, like a piston moving, just relentless forward momentum. It covered ground in a way that didn't seem possible. Its legs were long, and each step ate up a huge amount of distance. My brain tried to file it away. A man in a coat, a bear, but it was upright, and its proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. The head was roundish, sitting directly on broad shoulders with no real neck to speak of. "Dad," my daughter whispered from the back, her voice thin and scared. I didn't answer. My hand acted on its own, flicking the switch for the parking lights. I didn't want the full headlights blinding it or us, but I needed to see. The dim, yellowish parking lights cut a weak swathe through the darkness, just enough to illuminate the road directly in front of the car. The thing took two more of those impossibly long, fluid strides, and passed directly in front of our car. I slammed my foot on the brake, even though we were barely moving. The car jerked to a stop. It was right there, maybe 10 feet in front of the bumper. The parking lights lit it up just enough to remove any last doubt that this was an animal I recognized. It was massive. I'd later estimate it between 6.5 and 7.5 feet tall. It was covered in hair, but not fur like a dog. This was coarse, stringy, dark brown hair, almost black in the low light. It was thick across the shoulders and chest, thinner on its legs. I could see the powerful muscles working under the hair with each step. It didn't look at us as it crossed. It just moved with this single-minded purpose. Its left arm swung forward, and as it took its third step, the tips of its long, thick fingers brushed against the hood of my car. I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, not a metal sound, but like coarse bristles dragging over painted metal. My eyes were glued to the spot on the hood where its hand had been. I could almost feel the ghost of that contact. In 3 more steps, just 3, it had crossed the entire 2-lane road. It moved from our side to the other side in what felt like a single continuous motion. It didn't break its stride. It reached the other side of the road, where there was a small, beaten-down trail leading into the woods behind the old community church. And then it stopped. It just stopped right at the edge of the tree line. The woods were a solid wall of blackness behind it. For a second, it was just a huge, dark silhouette against a darker background. Then it turned its head. It turned its head and looked right at us. The parking lights were still on, casting their pathetic glow, and in that weak light, we saw its eyes. They weren't reflecting red like a deer's. They were a bright, phosphorescent green, a sickly, electric green that seemed to generate its own light. They didn't shine, they glowed. 2 perfect green orbs pinned on us in the darkness. My heart just stopped. I mean, it felt like it seized up in my chest. My breath caught. I could feel my wife's hand clamp down on my forearm, her nails digging into my skin through my jacket. From the back seat, there was absolute silence. My daughter wasn't even breathing. It watched us. It wasn't a long look, probably only 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. There was no emotion in that look, no curiosity, no anger. It was just an assessment, a cold, detached registration of our presence. It was the look a machine would give you, or a force of nature. It wasn't looking at us like we were prey or a threat. We were just there. Then it turned its head back towards the woods, took one final ground-eating step, and was gone. It just melted into the trees. 1 second it was there, a solid physical thing that had just touched my car, and the next, the darkness had swallowed it whole. The silence in the car was heavier than any sound I've ever heard. It was a thick, suffocating silence. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I could feel the cold sweat starting to prickle on my back. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. I don't think any of us could. We just sat there, staring at the empty space where it had been, staring at the trail entrance. My mind was a complete blank. All the logic, all the education, all the reason I had spent years building up was just gone, wiped clean. All that was left was a primal, bone-deep fear, the kind of fear that you're born with, the kind that tells you are small and there are things in the dark that are not. I don't know how long we sat there. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 2 minutes. Then a single word broke the silence. It was my wife. Her voice was a dry, cracked whisper, stripped of all air. Go. That one word was like a switch being thrown. My body unlocked. My foot stomped on the gas pedal a little too hard, and the car lurched forward onto the road. I didn't turn the headlights on. I was afraid of what they might illuminate in the woods to my right. I just drove, staring straight ahead, my whole body trembling. I drove maybe a quarter of a mile, just enough to get to the next intersection, a 4-way stop with a single, flickering yellow light. I pulled over to the side of the road, put the car in park, and just sat there. My hands shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel again to steady them. I looked at my wife. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on nothing. She was just shaking her head slowly back and forth. I turned to look in the back seat. My daughter was curled up, her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in them. She was crying, but it was a silent, shaking cry. No one said anything. What was there to say? Did you just see that? It was too stupid a question. We had all seen it. We had all felt it. The reality of it was sitting in the car with us, a fourth passenger, sucking all the air out of the space. I finally managed to turn on the headlights for the drive home. The rest of the drive was completely silent. Every shadow at the side of the road made me jump. Every shape in the dark looked like it was about to start moving with that same terrible, smooth stride. When we got home, we got my daughter to bed. She didn't want to talk about it. We didn't push her. My wife and I went downstairs, made tea, and just sat at the kitchen table staring at each other. We tried to talk about it, but our words were just circling the drain. It was so big. The way it moved. Those eyes. We couldn't get past the basic sensory facts. Our brains couldn't process it into a coherent narrative. A couple of weeks went by. The initial sharp terror had faded into a low-grade constant unease. I'm a researcher by nature, and I needed some kind of objective data, even if it was just for the three of us. So I had an idea. I sat down with my wife and my daughter separately. I gave each of them a piece of paper and a pen. I said, "Don't talk to each other about it, just write down what you saw that night. Describe it in as much detail as you can, its size, its shape, how it moved, everything." They both went into different rooms and did it. I did the same. When we were done, we came back to the kitchen table and laid the 3 pieces of paper side by side. It was chilling. The descriptions were nearly identical. All 3 of us wrote down the same estimated height. We all described the coarse, dark brown hair. We all mentioned the unnaturally long arms and the smooth, powerful gait. We all wrote about the green eyes. My daughter, in her 10-year-old handwriting, had drawn a little arrow pointing to her description of the hand and written, "It touched the car." We had all noted that. There were no significant contradictions. It wasn't 3 people seeing 3 different things. We had all witnessed the exact same entity. That confirmation, in some ways, was almost more frightening than the initial sighting. It removed the last possible refuge of maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe I was just tired. It was real. We had all seen a real thing. We didn't talk about it much after that. It became this unspoken thing in our family, a shared scar. Life went on. Years passed. My daughter grew up. We moved to a different town in the same state. Then a few years ago, I was browsing online and I came across a report from a cryptid research group. It was a sighting report from our same county, about 2 miles away from my uncle's old house. The date was recent. The person described seeing a large bipedal creature covered in dark hair, moving quickly into the woods. They mentioned its incredible speed and its glowing eyes. That's what finally made me decide to write this down. Seeing that report, knowing that someone else, years later, had seen what we saw in the same area. It brought it all back. The fear felt fresh again. I've spent my life studying humans and what they believe. I've read the folklore, the indigenous tales, the modern Bigfoot reports. I always looked at them as cultural artifacts, as stories people tell to explain the unknown or to bind communities together. I never for 1 second believed they were describing a biological reality. But I was wrong. I don't know what it was. I don't call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch because those are names from stories, and this wasn't a story. This was a physical animal, a creature of flesh and blood and coarse hair that scraped against my car. It was there. It moved with a power and a grace that was both beautiful and utterly terrifying. It looked at us with those glowing green eyes, and in that look I felt the entire comfortable framework of my understanding of the world crack and fall away. I still think about those eyes. I see them sometimes when I'm driving at night on a dark road. I'll catch a reflection from a road sign or an animal, and for a split second my heart will hammer against my ribs, and I'll be right back in that car, frozen, watching that thing stride across the road and turn its head. It was real, and I have no explanation for it, none at all. Story 11. The day everything went to hell started like any other. I woke up around 7 in the morning, the sun just starting to filter through the dusty windows of my bedroom. I remember stretching and feeling that usual ache in my back from the old mattress, but my mind was already on the list of things I needed to do. The garden hose had been chewed through again, the 3rd time in 2 weeks, and I had to run to the hardware store to get a new one. I'd given up trying to figure out what was doing it, because every time I asked someone in town, they'd just shrug and change the subject. Once, I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd seen something big and shaggy near the garage a while back, and how I'd yelled and thrown a rock at it. The guy at the gas station looked at me like I'd kicked his dog. He told me, real quiet, that I should keep my head down and not bother the folks in the woods. I didn't know what that meant then, but now I do. That morning, I went outside to check on the new well I'd had installed after the old one got condemned. The sewage system had been sabotaged. Someone, or something, had clogged it with clay, and when the inspectors came, they found fecal matter that wasn't human. The whole thing was a nightmare, and I spent thousands fixing it. As I walked toward the well, I noticed the ground was softer than usual, like it had been dug up recently. My stomach tightened. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the dirt. It was moist and clumpy, with these deep impressions that didn't look like any animal track I'd ever seen. They were huge, almost like a bear's, but longer, with toes that splayed out. I felt a chill, even though the sun was warming up. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just kids or wildlife, but deep down, I knew. I spent the morning trying to distract myself with chores. I fixed the garden hose, patching it up as best I could, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every little noise made me jump. A branch snapping, the wind rustling the trees. Around noon, I drove into town to pick up some groceries. The store was quiet, and the cashier, an older woman named Betty, who'd always been friendly, gave me a tight smile. I made small talk, but when I mentioned that I'd heard strange noises at night lately, her face went blank. She just said, "You ought to let sleeping dogs lie, dear," and handed me my change. I felt that familiar anger bubbling up. Why wouldn't anyone help me? Why were they protecting whatever was out there? Back at the house, the afternoon dragged on. I tried to watch TV, but the signal was fuzzy, and I kept glancing out the window toward the woods. The trees are thick out there, dense and dark, even in daylight. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, but now it felt like a wall hiding something terrible. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Bad idea. As I stepped into the backyard, I saw that the trash cans had been knocked over again. Garbage was strewn everywhere, but it wasn't raccoons. This was deliberate. My tools from the shed were laid out in a line, like someone had arranged them, and a bag of potatoes I'd left in the garage was torn open, spuds scattered and half-eaten. That sack of potatoes brought it all back. The first time I saw one of those things, it was just a few weeks after I moved in. I'd gone into the garage late at night to grab something, and there it was, tall, covered in dark, shaggy hair, with these long arms. It was hunched over, stuffing potatoes into its mouth. I screamed and threw a rock I had in my hand. It hit its shoulder, and the thing let out this screech that made my blood run cold. It ran off into the woods, but the sound stayed with me. When I told a neighbor about it the next day, he got red in the face and told me I should have left it alone. After that, I learned to keep my mouth shut. As dusk settled in, the unease grew into full-blown dread. I made dinner, but I couldn't eat. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept the lights on, but the darkness outside felt like it was pressing in. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to go to bed early, hoping to sleep through whatever might happen. But as I lay there, I heard it. A low, grinding noise from outside, like something digging. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, and it was coming from near the new well. My heart started pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I knew I had to check it out. I couldn't just lie there and let whatever it was destroy another part of my property. I got out of bed and pulled on my jeans and a jacket. My hands were sweaty as I reached for the revolver I kept in the nightstand. I'd bought it after the first few incidents, but I never thought I'd actually have to use it. I also grabbed the big spotlight I used for emergencies. It was heavy, and the beam was bright enough to cut through the darkest night. I crept downstairs, trying to be quiet, but every step sounded like a drum beat in the silence. The house felt colder than usual, and the air had this damp, earthy smell like wet soil and something else, something musky, almost like a wet dog. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The night was pitch black, no moon, and the only light came from the stars, but they were faint behind the clouds. The digging sound was clearer now, a rhythmic scraping and thudding from the direction of the well. I clicked on the spotlight, and the beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating patches of grass and trees. My breath fogged in the air, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I moved slowly, my feet crunching on the gravel path I'd laid down. Every few steps I'd stop and listen. The digging would pause, then start again, like whatever was out there knew I was coming but didn't care. As I got closer to the well, I saw it. A massive dark shape was hunched over the ground, its back to me. It was bigger than a man, covered in that shaggy hair I remembered, and it was using its hands to dig into the earth around the well pipe. The pipe was exposed, and I could see it was bent like someone had been trying to rip it out. I felt a surge of rage mixed with terror. This thing was trying to sabotage my water supply again, just like it did with the sewage. I raised the spotlight higher, aiming the beam directly at it. The moment the light hit it, the creature froze. Then it turned its head slowly, and I saw its face. Dark, deep-set eyes that reflected the light, and a mouth that opened in a snarl. It let out that same screech I'd heard before, but this time it was louder, more piercing, like it was right in my head. The sound echoed through the woods, and for a second I thought my ears would burst. I stumbled back, almost dropping the spotlight, and the thing stood up. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and it took a step toward me. I fumbled with the revolver, my fingers slipping on the grip. I didn't want to shoot it, but I was so scared I couldn't think straight. I shouted, "Get away from me!" But my voice came out as a croak. The creature just stared, its eyes locked on mine, and then it vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, like it melted into the shadows. The digging sound stopped, and the woods went silent. I stood there, shaking, the spotlight beam wavering in my hand. I could still smell that musky odor, strong now, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I stayed out there for what felt like forever, scanning the trees with the light, but I didn't see anything else. Finally, I turned and ran back to the house, locking the door behind me. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My whole body was trembling, and I could still hear that screech ringing in my ears. I thought it was over, but then I heard another noise, this time from the front of the house. It was a low growl, followed by the sound of something heavy moving. I peeked through the window and saw two of them, two Sasquatch, standing in my driveway. One was holding a length of metal pipe, like it had torn it from somewhere, and it was tapping it against the ground. The other was just watching, its arms crossed. They weren't running away this time. They were standing their ground, like they were challenging me. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the fear or the anger from months of harassment. But I flung open the front door and stepped outside, the revolver in one hand and the spotlight in the other. I shone the light on them, and they didn't flinch. The one with the pipe raised it like it was about to swing it at me. I yelled, "Leave me alone!" But my voice was shaky. I raised the revolver and fired 2 shots into the air. The bang was deafening, louder than anything I'd ever heard. For a moment, everything went silent. My ears were ringing, and I couldn't hear anything else. I saw the creatures take a step back, but they didn't run. The one with the pipe dropped it, and they both turned and disappeared into the woods, moving so fast it was like they were never there. I stood there in the driveway, the gun still smoking in my hand. My ears were throbbing, and I realized I'd temporarily deafened myself. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the ringing. I sank to my knees, the gravel digging into my skin, and I started to cry. I cried because I was scared, because I was alone, and because I knew I couldn't win. Those things weren't just animals, they were intelligent, and they wanted me gone. The town would never help me. I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. The next morning, I called a real estate agent and put the house on the market. I told them I needed a quick sale, and I didn't care about the price. I packed my things and left within a week. I never went back. To this day, I don't know what those creatures were or why the town protected them, but I know they're still out there. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think I hear that screech, and my heart starts pounding all over again. Dictate story 12. I live on a dead-end road, surrounded on 3 sides by woods and farmland. My nearest neighbor is about a quarter-mile away. It's the kind of place where you get used to the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. You stop jumping at every little noise. But that night, Buddy was acting different from the second we stepped off the porch. Buddy's a big, goofy Labrador mix. His usual routine is to bolt ahead, his leash going taut, pulling me along while he sniffs every single weed and fence post. But not that night. The moment his paws hit the gravel driveway, he pressed himself against my leg. I actually looked down and said, "What's up with you, boy?" He wasn't whining or anything, just rigid. His whole body was tense, and he kept his head on a swivel, looking into the dark tree line that runs along the road. I figured he'd maybe smelled a skunk or a raccoon, something that spooked him. I gave his leash a little tug, and we started walking. We usually go about half a mile down to the old metal gate that marks the end of the county's maintenance, and then turn back. It's our loop. That night, we barely made it halfway. Buddy was still glued to my side, which was so unusual I kept patting his head, trying to reassure him. The only sound was our feet crunching on the gravel. It was too quiet. I remember that specifically. The crickets had stopped. I hadn't noticed it at first, but once I did, the silence felt heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. That's when Buddy froze. Not a slow stop, but a full-on, 4-paws planted statue freeze. His head was cocked, staring straight into a thick patch of woods about 50 feet off the road to our left. The hair on his back, from his neck all the way down his spine, stood straight up. A low growl started deep in his chest, a sound I'd never heard him make before. It wasn't a play growl, it was a warning. "What is it, Buddy?" I whispered, my own voice sounding too loud in the stillness. I followed his line of sight, squinting into the darkness between the trees. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows and more shadows. Then I saw them. 2 points of red light, reflecting something, maybe the starlight. They were set far, far apart, and they were high up, way higher than a deer's eyes, higher than a man's. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. An owl? No. The eyes were too big, too red, and they weren't moving like a bird's would. They were just fixed, staring right back at us. My heart started thumping, a hard, slow beat in my ears. I stood there paralyzed, just like Buddy. I was trying to see the shape attached to those eyes. It was like my vision had to adjust, to separate the thing from the darkness it was part of. And then it did. I saw a massive black shape outlined against the slightly less dark background of the trees. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and whatever this was, it had to be at least 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet taller than me. It was broad, with shoulders that looked impossibly wide, and it was just standing there, perfectly still. This is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. The terror moment. It stepped out from the trees. It didn't crash through the underbrush. It didn't make a sound. It just moved. It took one slow, deliberate step onto the edge of the tree line, its foot settling on the gravel and leaves without so much as a crunch. That's what got me. The silence of its movement. Something that big should have made noise. It should have snapped twigs, rustled leaves. It didn't. It was like a ghost. The shape was now fully visible. It was covered in thick, dark hair, maybe black or a very deep brown. It looked heavy, matted. It stood on two legs, just like a person, but it wasn't a person. No person is built like that. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. Its head was blocky, sitting directly on those huge shoulders without much of a neck, and those red eyes never left us. A cold dread, the kind you feel in the pit of your stomach, just flooded through me. This wasn't curiosity, this was pure animal fear. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even move for a second. Buddy's growl turned into a sharp, panicked bark, and that broke the spell. "Come on, Buddy," I choked out, my voice tight and thin. I yanked on his leash, spinning around to head back the way we came. I didn't run at first. I walked fast, my back tingling, expecting to feel a hand or a claw grab me at any second. I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder. It was following us. It wasn't running. It was just walking, keeping to the tree line, moving with that same unnatural silence. Its long legs covered ground easily, keeping pace with our hurried walk. And I could see its eyes, those two red pinpricks of light, glowing between the branches as it moved parallel to us. They never blinked. They just stayed locked on us. That's when I started to run. It was a clumsy, terrified run. The gravel skidded under my shoes. Buddy was right with me, his claws scrabbling for purchase, not pulling ahead, but staying right by my side, as scared as I was. I could hear my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I didn't dare look back again. I just focused on the distant yellow glow of my porch light, a tiny beacon of safety that seemed a million miles away. The whole way back, I could feel it. I can't explain it, but I knew it was still there, just inside the woods, matching our pace. I could sense its presence, a heavy, malevolent pressure in the air around us. I didn't see it again until we burst out of the tree-lined part of the road and into the open area around my house. My property has a few acres of lawn before the woods start up again. As I stumbled up my driveway, gasping for air, I risked one last look toward the woods. It was there, at the very edge where the trees meet my yard, just standing, watching. The red eyes were dimmer now with the porch light washing out the darkness, but I could still see them. It was so tall, its head clearing the lower branches of the oaks. I fumbled with my keys at the front door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I finally got the door open, shoved Buddy inside, and practically fell in after him, slamming the door shut and throwing the deadbolt. I stood there for a second, my back against the door, my chest heaving. Then I remembered the porch light. I lunged for the switch next to the door and flipped it off, plunging the porch into darkness. I moved to the front window, peering through a crack in the blinds. My eyes took a second to adjust to the dark again. At first, I saw nothing, just the familiar shapes of my yard and the dark wall of the forest beyond. Then I saw movement, a deeper blackness detaching itself from the trees. It was moving along the tree line, pacing. It was circling my property. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just some animal that got curious. It was investigating, staking the place out. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Buddy was going insane. He was barking non-stop, a high-pitched, frantic sound, his claws clicking on the hardwood floor as he ran from the front door to the window and back. He wasn't just barking at the door. He was tracking something moving around the house. Then I heard it, a heavy, deliberate creak from the front porch, the sound of a weight settling on the old wooden planks. I stopped breathing. Buddy went silent for a split second, his head cocked, and then he started barking even more furiously, hurling himself at the front door. A sound came from the other side of the door. It wasn't a human sound. It wasn't an animal sound I'd ever heard. It was a low, guttural, growl-like noise, but it had a weird, almost vocal quality to it. It was deep, vibrating through the wood of the door. It was the kind of sound you feel in your teeth. It lasted for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then it stopped. I heard the wood creak again, the sound of the weight shifting, and then heavy footsteps moving away from the porch. They weren't fast. They were slow, thudding steps, like someone was in no hurry at all. I thought it was over. I thought it had left. I was wrong. The footsteps didn't fade into the distance. They just kept going, circling the house. From the front porch, around the side, I could hear them crunching on the gravel path that runs along the east side of the house. Then they were in the backyard. I ran to the kitchen, which looks out into the backyard, and peered out the window over the sink. I couldn't see anything, but I could still hear the footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. A slow, steady, terrifying rhythm. Then the screams started. They came from the backyard. They were wrong. They started low, like a woman's scream, but then they'd rise into this high-pitched, almost whistling shriek before dropping back down into a guttural roar. There was no sense of panic in them. They sounded calculated, like a display, a warning. They echoed in the quiet night, and I heard Buddy whimper and hide under the kitchen table. I slid down the kitchen cabinets onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, covering my ears. I was trembling all over, cold sweat soaking through my shirt. The screaming would stop for a minute and then start up again from a different part of the yard. The footsteps kept circling. It felt like it was out there for hours, just walking and screaming, walking and screaming. I have no idea how long it actually lasted. Time lost all meaning. I just sat on that cold linoleum floor, listening to a nightmare play out just outside my walls. Eventually, the screams stopped. The footsteps faded. The silence returned, but now it was 1,000 times more terrifying than before. I didn't move from that spot for a long time. I just listened, straining my ears for any sound. Buddy eventually crept out from under the table and lay down next to me, pressing his trembling body against my side. We sat there together until the first hints of dawn started to lighten the sky outside the window. When the sun was fully up, when the world looked normal and safe again, I finally found the courage to go outside. My legs were still weak. I went out the front door first, Buddy hesitantly following me. I looked at the porch. There, in a patch of soft dirt next to the bottom step, was a single footprint. It was massive, longer than my forearm, and wide. It was clearly a footprint, with a definite arch and 5-toe impressions. But the toes, they were long, and the print was deep, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. I just stared at it, my mind refusing to fully process what I was seeing. I didn't look for more. I didn't need to. I went back inside and locked the door. For the next week, Buddy refused to go outside after dark. If I tried to take him out, he would plant his feet and pull back toward the house, a low whine in his throat. I didn't force him. A few days after it happened, I was getting my mail, and my neighbor from down the road drove by, stopping to chat. He said, "Hey, you hear those god-awful screams the other night? Sounded like a woman being murdered. Called the sheriff, but they didn't find anything." I just shook my head and said no, must have slept through it. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't tell him about the red eyes in the trees, the silent footsteps on the gravel, the thing that stood on my porch and growled, or the footprints I found. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? They'd think I was crazy. Sometimes I wonder if I am. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that something huge and silent and not human, followed me home that night, walked around my house, and screamed into the darkness for reasons I will never, ever understand. The footprint washed away in a rainstorm a few days later, but the memory of that night is permanently carved into me. I still look out at the tree line every night before I turn off the lights, and I always make sure the doors are locked. Story 13. All right, so this happened back in 2009 during deer season. I've been sitting on this for years, and I still get the shakes thinking about it. I've told a couple of close buddies, but they just nod and look at me like I've lost it. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it, or at least get it off my chest. I was hunting in the valley between Boland Lake and Tanner Lake, a spot I'd been going to since I was a kid with my dad. It's rugged country, thick with pine and spruce, and that time of year, the snow starts piling up early. That morning, I woke up before dawn, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I remember pulling on my layers, my breath fogging in the air, and lacing up my boots. The snow was already ankle-deep from a fall the night before, crunching under my feet as I headed out from my truck. I'd parked off an old logging road, about a mile from where I planned to set up. The sky was grey and heavy, like it might dump more snow any minute, but I was determined. I'd taken time off work for this, and I needed the meat for the winter. I hiked in slow, keeping my rifle slung over my shoulder, my gloves thick, but still letting the cold bite through. The woods were quiet, the kind of silence that only comes with fresh snow. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch under my boots. I found a good spot on a ridge overlooking a clearing where deer often pass through. I settled against a fallen log, my back to the trunk, and waited. The cold made my fingers stiff, but I kept them tucked under my arms to stay warm. Time dragged on, and I started to think maybe nothing would show. Then around mid-morning, I saw movement down in the clearing. A buck, a nice one, maybe 8 points, stepped out from the trees. He was cautious, sniffing the air, his breath puffing little clouds. My heart started hammering in my chest. I slowly raised my rifle, my fingers fumbling a bit with the cold, but I got him in my sights. I took a deep breath, let it out slow, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley, and the buck dropped instantly. No struggle, just went down like a sack of potatoes. I felt that rush of adrenaline, that satisfaction of a clean kill. I waited a minute, watching to make sure he didn't get up. Then I started toward him. The snow made the going slow, but I was pumped. I remember thinking about how I'd feel dress him right there, haul him back to the truck, and maybe have venison steaks that night. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards out, something felt off. The buck wasn't where I'd seen him fall. I blinked, thinking maybe the snow was playing tricks on me, but no, the spot was empty. I hurried over, my boots sinking into the snow, and when I reached where he should have been, all I saw was a dark red stain in the snow, about the size of a dinner plate, and a set of footprints leading away. At first, I was pissed. I thought some other hunter had swooped in and stolen my deer. I've heard stories about poachers in these parts, but I'd never run into any. Rage boiled up in me. I'd worked for that buck and someone just waltzed in and took it? The footprints were huge, way bigger than a man's, and deep like whatever made them was heavy. But in the heat of the moment, I didn't think twice. I figured it was just someone in big boots, maybe carrying the deer, explaining the depth. I started following the tracks, my rifle gripped tight, my jaw clenched. The tracks led away from the clearing into thicker woods. The snow was messier here, with broken branches and disturbed underbrush. I remember the air feeling colder, sharper, like the temperature had dropped. My breath came in ragged puffs, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I kept going, my anger fueling me, but after a while, that started to fade into unease. The footprints weren't just big. They were spaced far apart, like whatever made them was taking massive strides. I had to jog to keep up, and my legs were burning from pushing through the snow. After about 10 minutes of following, I burst out into a small meadow, maybe the size of a football field. The snow was lighter here and the trees opened up. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 30 yards away, was my deer. But it wasn't on the ground, it was slung over the shoulder of this thing. I froze, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. It was massive, over 9 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur that looked almost black against the snow. It was walking on 2 legs, but its posture was hunched, powerful like a gorilla's. The deer looked small, draped over its shoulder like a kid's toy. My first thought was bear, but bears don't walk upright like that, not for long, and this thing was moving smoothly, effortlessly. Then it turned. It must have heard me or sensed me because it stopped and slowly looked back over its shoulder. That's when I saw its face. It was ape-like, with a heavy brow ridge, deep-set eyes that gleamed darkly, and a broad, flat nose. It grunted, a low, guttural sound that reminded me of a bear, but deeper, more resonant. The sound vibrated in my chest, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I stood there, frozen, my rifle half raised. I didn't know whether to shoot or run. My mind was racing. This couldn't be real. Maybe I was hallucinating from the cold or the adrenaline. But it was there, solid, real. I could smell it, a musky, earthy scent that hung in the air like wet dog and old leaves. Its fur was clumped with snow, and I could see the muscles rippling under its coat as it shifted its weight. It stared at me, and I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that roots you to the spot. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my rifle. Then it growled. Not a loud roar, but a low, menacing rumble that seemed to come from deep in its throat. The sound made the hair on my neck stand up. It took a step and I flinched, expecting it to charge, but instead it turned and vanished into the trees on the other side of the meadow. Just like that, it was gone. The movement was so fast, so fluid, it didn't seem possible for something that big. Something snapped in me then. The fear mixed with this insane determination. I had to see where it went. I had to know what it was. I started running after it, my legs pumping, my breath coming in gasps. The snow was deeper here, and I was stumbling, falling, getting back up. I could hear it moving ahead of me, crashing through the brush, but it was outpacing me easily. I pushed myself, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. After a few minutes, I broke through into another clearing, but there was nothing. No sign of it, no sound. Just the quiet woods and the falling snow. I stood there, panting, my body trembling from exertion and fear. The tracks were gone, swallowed up by the forest. It was like it had never been there. I looked around, my mind reeling. That's when it hit me, what I'd seen. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a man, it was a Sasquatch. I'd heard the stories, seen the blurry videos, but I never believed, not really, until that moment. The realization washed over me, and I felt this deep, cold dread. I was alone out there, miles from anyone, and I'd just come face to face with something that shouldn't exist. I didn't stick around. I turned and hauled ass back to my truck, not stopping, not looking back. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I got to the truck, I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking, and drove out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even bother with my gear. I left it all behind. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and sat in my kitchen, just staring at the wall. I couldn't sleep that night, every little noise making me bolt upright. In the days that followed, I went over it again and again in my head, the way it moved, the sound it made, the look in its eyes. It wasn't aggressive, not really. It could have easily come at me, but it didn't. It just took my deer and left, but that doesn't make it any less terrifying. I've been back to that valley a couple of times since, but I never hunt alone anymore, and I always keep my head on a swivel. I never saw it again, and part of me is glad, but part of me wonders, what was it doing there? How many are out there? I don't have answers, and I probably never will. All I know is that day changed me. I don't look at the woods the same way anymore. There's things out there we don't understand, and maybe that's for the best. Story 14. Okay, here it is. It was August 2019. I need to write this down. I've been carrying it around for years now, and sometimes I'll just be sitting there doing nothing, and the whole thing will slam back into me, the sound and the smell and the pure gut-level fear. I don't talk about it much. People either think you're crazy or they want all the exciting details without understanding the part where you genuinely thought you were going to die. But I think if I don't get it out, it's just going to keep festering inside me. My girlfriend and I decided to go camping up in northern British Columbia. We'd been there before, a couple of years prior, to this incredible spot deep in the lake region. It's not a park or anything, just crown land, real backcountry stuff. You need a boat to get to this particular cove. The first time we went, it was perfect, quiet, beautiful, completely isolated. We had this idea that it would be a nice way to unplug before summer ended. A sort of reset. We packed up my old truck, hitched up the little aluminum boat and drove for what felt like forever. The roads got narrower and rougher, the trees got bigger, and the cell service bars on my phone just disappeared one by one. By the time we got to the boat launch, it was already late afternoon. The air had that cool, clean smell that only seems to exist up north, a mix of pine needles and cold water. The boat ride to the cove took about 20 minutes. The water was like glass, just perfectly still, reflecting the huge mountains and the dark green of the forest. It was so quiet, the only sound was the putter of my little outboard motor. When we rounded the point and saw the cove, it was exactly as I remembered it, a small crescent of pale gravel beach backed by a wall of massive cedar and hemlock trees. It felt like we were the only two people left on Earth. We dragged the boat up onto the gravel, high enough that it wouldn't float away if the water level changed. Setting up camp was routine. We had a good tent, a 3-person dome thing that felt like a fortress. We put it up on a flat, soft patch of ground, maybe 30 feet from the water's edge, where the trees started. We gathered some dry wood for a fire later, hung our food bag from a high branch a good distance from the tent with a proper bear hang. The whole drill. We'd done it 100 times. We were careful, you know. We weren't idiots about the woods. We made dinner on the little camp stove, some dehydrated pasta thing, and sat by the fire as the sun went down. The sky turned this insane shade of orange and purple. It was peaceful. My girlfriend was tired from the drive and the fresh air, and she turned in early, maybe around 10. I stayed up for a bit, just staring into the embers of the fire, listening to the lake water gently lapping at the shore. It was one of those moments where you feel completely content. I finally doused the fire with lake water, making sure it was out cold, and crawled into the tent. My girlfriend was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I zipped the tent flap shut, settled into my sleeping bag, and just lay there for a while, looking at the ceiling of the tent. The moon was bright, so it wasn't pitch black inside. You could see the shadows of the trees. That's when I noticed the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a dead silence. When we'd gone to bed, you could still hear the little night noises, the peepers down by the water, the occasional rustle in the bushes, the wind way up in the treetops. But now, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the entire cove. My ears were almost ringing with the absence of noise. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck, a gut feeling that something was off. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. The woods get quiet sometimes. I rolled over and tried to sleep. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake. It wasn't a sound that woke me up. It was a vibration, a heavy, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the forest behind our tent. It was footsteps, but they were too heavy to be a deer or even a moose. These were slow, deliberate, and they made the ground shake just a little. I could feel it through the tent floor. I lay there frozen, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I held my breath, listening, The footsteps stopped, maybe 50, 60 feet away, just inside the tree line. Then I heard the breathing. It wasn't human. It was this low, wet, rumbling sound, like air being dragged in and out of a massive pair of lungs, a deep, guttural inhalation, then a long, slow exhalation that sounded like it had gravel in it. It was close, too close. My girlfriend was still asleep beside me. I wanted to shake her, to tell her to be quiet, but I was paralyzed. I was just a pair of ears and a pounding heart in the dark. Then the footsteps started again. They were closer now. Thump, thump. Each one was a distinct impact. I could hear the crunch of gravel and the snap of a small twig under a weight that seemed impossible. It was circling the camp. It was moving from the trees behind us, around to the side of the tent. I slowly, so slowly, it felt like my joints were creaking, turned my head on the pillow. The side of the tent was made of this grey nylon, and with the moonlight I could see the silhouette of the trees outside. And then I saw a shadow fall over that part of the tent, a huge, dark shape that blotted out the light. It stopped right next to us. The breathing got louder. It was right there, just the thin layer of tent fabric between us and whatever it was. I could smell it now too, a thick, musky odor, like wet dog and old meat and dirt, something profoundly animal and wild. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Then the tent wall moved. It didn't shake or wobble. It bent inward. Something was pressing against it from the outside. It was a slow, steady pressure, like someone was leaning a heavy weight against it. The nylon fabric strained, and the pole on that side of the tent let out a sharp crack sound. I could see the shape of the pressure. It was big, maybe the size of a dinner plate, and it was pushing the wall in towards my face. I was staring at this bulge in the tent, my mouth dry, my whole body rigid with terror. The breathing was right there. I mean, I could have reached out and touched the tent wall, and my hand would have been a foot away from its mouth. It was that slow, non-human rhythm, in and out, a deep, rumbling sigh. It felt like it was sniffing the air, trying to scent us. I don't know how long it stayed there. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only 30 seconds. Then the pressure on the tent wall released, and the fabric snapped back into place with a quiet rustle. The shadow moved away. I heard the heavy footsteps again, moving away from the tent, towards the center of our camp. My body unlocked all at once, and I let out a shaky breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I finally reached over and put my hand on my girlfriend's shoulder. She stirred. "What is it?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Shh," I whispered, my own voice a dry croak. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." She went still instantly, her eyes wide in the dim light. She could see the fear on my face. We listened. We heard the footsteps moving around near where we'd had the fire. Then there was a sound of rustling and a sharp twang. I knew that sound. It was the paracord from our food hang snapping. It wasn't a break, it was a clean, sharp snap, like something had yanked it with immense force. We heard a soft thud as the food bag hit the ground, then a sound of tearing canvas and the clatter of our pots and pans as whatever it was went through our supplies. It didn't sound frantic like a bear. It was methodical. It was just investigating, tearing our stuff apart because it could. It stayed in the camp for what felt like a long time. We just lay there holding on to each other, listening to it move around. The footsteps, the occasional low grunt, the sound of things being broken. The smell was everywhere, filling the tent. My girlfriend had her face buried in my shoulder, and I could feel her trembling. I was shaking too, a fine, constant tremor I couldn't control. Eventually the sounds moved away, back towards the tree line. The footsteps grew fainter, and then they were gone. The forest was silent again, that terrible dead silence. We didn't sleep another wink. We just waited for the sun to come up, listening to every tiny sound, our nerves completely shot. The first grey light of dawn was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. When it was finally light enough to see, I slowly, carefully unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The camp was a wreck. Our food bag was shredded. Cans of beans were dented and scattered everywhere. The plastic container with our oatmeal was crushed into pieces. But that wasn't the worst part. The ground was covered in footprints. They were huge. I mean, absolutely massive. I wear a size 12 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was easily twice as long and twice as wide. They were human-like, but not quite right. They had a splayed look to them, with 5 distinct toes, and the impression was deep, like whatever made them weighed a ton. They were pressed into the hard-packed gravel and even into the forest floor where the soil was softer. They were everywhere, around the tent, around the fire pit, leading to and from the trees. My girlfriend came out and saw them and just put her hand over her mouth. She didn't say anything. What was there to say? We were both too scared to even speak much. We moved around the camp in a daze, gathering what was left of our things. We weren't staying. No way, we were getting in that boat and leaving. But we had to see, we had to know. We followed the tracks from the camp into the forest. They led a little way in, maybe 100 feet. And then we saw it, a tree, a young cedar, probably about as thick as my thigh. It was just shoved over, not broken, not snapped. It was leaning at a 45-degree angle, its roots partly torn out of the ground, the earth around them pushed up into a mound. The bark on the side that had been pushed was scraped and raw. It looked like someone had taken a bulldozer to it, but there was no machine, just those same huge footprints all around the base. That's when the reality of the situation truly hit me. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't push over trees for fun. This was something else, something with a strength I couldn't comprehend. We hurried back to the camp, our hearts racing all over again. We started throwing our surviving gear into the boat, not even bothering to pack it properly. We just wanted to be gone. The silence felt threatening now. The forest felt like it was watching us. I was grabbing the collapsed tent when my girlfriend let out a small, choked gasp. She was staring past me, towards the tree line on the other side of the small clearing where we'd set up camp. I turned around and I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 80 feet away. It was partially in shadow, but there was no mistaking what it was. It was huge, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and built like a gorilla, but standing upright on 2 legs. Its body was covered in shaggy, dark brown hair that was almost black. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging down past its knees. It just stood there, watching us. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a dark shape, but I could feel its gaze. It was intelligent. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was assessing us. Then it took a step forward, out of the shadows and into the morning sun. It let out a low, guttural grunt, a sound that came from deep in its chest. Then it stomped one of its huge feet on the ground. Thump! It wasn't a casual step. It was a display, a threat. That broke the spell. "The boat!" I yelled. We dropped everything and ran for the water. We were scrambling over the gravel, our feet slipping. I could hear it behind us, a sudden crashing in the undergrowth. It was coming. It wasn't just walking anymore. I risked a glance back. It was charging, not on all fours, but running upright, its powerful legs covering the ground with terrifying speed. Its mouth was open, and it let out a sound I will never ever forget. It wasn't a roar. It was a scream. A high-pitched, piercing, unbelievably loud scream that was full of rage. It was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard. My girlfriend was already at the boat, shoving it into the water. I splashed in after her, the cold water soaking my pants. We both scrambled in, falling over each other. The aluminum boat rocked violently. The creature was at the shoreline now, maybe 30 feet away. It stopped at the water's edge, its chest heaving. It was even bigger up close. The sheer mass of it was overwhelming. It screamed again, that ear-splitting shriek, and I saw its face properly for the first time. Dark, deep-set eyes under a heavy brow, a flat nose, a wide mouth. It was primal and ancient. It bent down, grabbed a thick branch from the ground, a piece of driftwood the size of my leg, and in one fluid, powerful motion it hurled it at us. It wasn't a throw like a person throws. It was a launch. The branch spun through the air and landed with a huge splash in the water about 10 feet from the boat, sending a wave that rocked us again. "Start the engine! Start the engine!" My girlfriend was screaming, her voice hysterical. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely function. I fumbled for the fuel line, squeezed the bulb, turned the choke. I grabbed the pull cord. "Please, please, please." I yanked it. Nothing. Just a sputter. The creature on the shore was pacing now, back and forth, slamming its fists against its chest. It was a dull, pounding sound, like a drum. It was working itself up. I pulled the cord again. Another sputter, a cough. It wasn't catching. It stopped pacing and looked right at me. It took a step into the water, then another. It was going to come in after us. I pulled the cord a third time, putting my whole body into it, a desperate, panicked yank. The engine roared to life. A cloud of blue smoke billowed out. I didn't even think. I shoved the throttle forward. The boat lurched. The propeller dug in and we shot away from the shore, skimming across the water. I looked back. The creature was standing chest deep in the water, watching us go. It didn't scream again. It just stood there, a massive dark shape against the green of the forest, until we rounded the point and it was gone. We didn't slow down until we were back at the boat launch. We loaded the boat onto the trailer in a frantic, silent hurry, got in the truck and drove. We didn't speak for hours. We just drove. We never went back. We never will. I still have dreams about it. The sound of its breathing right outside the tent. The sight of it standing there so massive and powerful. The feel of the tent wall bending in towards my face. And that scream. I'll always remember that scream. I don't know what it was. I don't care what people call it. All I know is that it was real, it was there, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. We were just in its space for one night, and it made sure we knew it. It made sure we never forgot. Story 15. I still can't believe I'm writing this down. It's been, well, a long time, but the memory is burned into me like a brand. I guess I need to get it out, because nobody would ever believe it if I said it out loud. This happened on January 4th, 1784. I know that date because later, people kept repeating it, like it was some kind of trophy day for them. For me, it was the day everything ended. I was out in the woods, way back from the Lake of the Woods, deep in what they call the American wilderness now. Back then, it was just home. I'd been living there for as long as I could remember, never really needing much else. I was fast, really fast and strong, standing nearly 7 feet tall and covered in thick, dark hair. I could move through the trees like a shadow. Most animals avoided me, and the few humans who wandered through never got close enough to see me properly. I'd hear them sometimes, their voices carrying on the wind, but I always stayed back, watching from a distance. They were loud and clumsy, nothing like the quiet of the forest. That day started like any other. I woke up with the sun, feeling the damp chill of the ground under me. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, and I could hear the birds starting their morning songs. I was hungry, so I decided to hunt. There was a bear that had been roaming near my usual spots, a big one, mean-tempered. I'd seen its tracks a few times, and I knew it would be a challenge. But I needed the meat. I found it by a creek, tearing at a fallen log. It must have smelled me because it turned and stood on its hind legs, snarling. I didn't waste time. I charged, and we collided with a sound like thunder. It was a brutal fight, claws tearing at my arms, my own strength driving into its body. I remember the heat of its breath, the way its fur matted with blood under my hands. Eventually I got the better of it, and it went down hard. I'd just killed it, and I was standing there, panting, with half the bear lying at my feet. The smell of blood was thick in the air, and I felt that raw, primal satisfaction of a good hunt. That's when everything went wrong. I didn't hear them at first. I was too focused on the bear, on the adrenaline fading from my body. But then a twig snapped, and I froze. I looked up, and there they were. A group of Indians, maybe 6 or 7 of them, emerging from the trees like ghosts. I'd seen them before, always from afar, and I'd always been able to outrun them. But this time, they were close. Too close. My first instinct was to run. I turned, ready to bolt into the deeper woods. But they were ready for me. They'd set up some kind of trap, nets made of vines and ropes, stretched between the trees. I hit one at full speed, and it wrapped around my legs, pulling me down. I crashed to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I could feel the rough fibers digging into my skin, and I thrashed, trying to break free. But more of them came at me from all sides. They were shouting in a language I didn't understand, their voices sharp and urgent. I could see their faces, painted with streaks of red and black, eyes wide with something between fear and determination. One of them threw a rope around my neck, and I choked, clawing at it with my hands. Another wrapped something around my arms, pulling them behind my back. I was strong, but they were working together, and I was off balance, still dizzy from the fall. I remember the feeling of their hands on me, warm and rough, so different from the cold of the forest. I could smell them too. A mix of smoke, sweat, and something else, something foreign. I roared, trying to scare them off, but they just tightened their grips. One of them hit me with something heavy, a club maybe, and pain exploded in my head. My vision swam, and for a second I thought I might pass out. But I didn't. I kept struggling, twisting and kicking, but they had me pinned. I could feel the weight of them on my back, their knees digging into my spine. The rope around my neck was cutting off my air, and I started to panic. I'd never felt trapped like that before. In the woods, I was always free, always moving. Now I was stuck, and the fear was like a cold stone in my gut. They dragged me to my feet, and I stood there, swaying. My body ached everywhere, and I could taste blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my cheek. I looked around, and I saw the half-eaten bear still lying there, its dead eyes staring at nothing. It felt like a mockery. I'd just won a fight, and now I was losing everything. They started moving me, pulling me through the woods. I tried to resist, digging my feet into the ground, but they were too many. One of them prodded me with a sharp stick, and I stumbled forward. The forest, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every tree, every rock seemed to be watching me, but there was no help coming. As we walked, I could feel the sun moving across the sky. It must have been hours. My legs were tired and my throat was raw from trying to roar or shout. I don't even know what sounds I was making. They didn't talk to me, just occasionally exchanged words with each other. I could tell they were nervous. Their hands shook when they adjusted the ropes, and they kept looking over their shoulders like they expected something to happen. At one point, we reached a clearing, and they stopped to rest. They tied me to a tree, and I slumped against the bark, feeling the rough wood against my back. I could see them sitting in a circle, passing around a water skin and some dried meat. One of them offered me a piece, but I turned my head away. I wasn't going to take anything from them. The hunger was gnawing at me, but the pride, or whatever you call it in a creature like me, was stronger. I remember staring at the sky, watching the clouds drift by. It was a clear day, blue and bright, but it felt all wrong. I should have been running, hunting, living. Instead, I was tied up, being led to who knows where. The helplessness was the worst part. I'd always relied on my speed and strength, and now both were useless. After a while, they untied me and we started moving again. This time we came to a river, and there was a boat waiting, a big, clumsy thing made of wood. I'd never seen anything like it up close. The water smelled different here, muddy and alive. They forced me onto the boat, and I almost fell overboard because I'd never been on one before. The rocking motion made my stomach lurch, and I had to sit down, my head spinning. They tied me to a post in the middle of the boat, and we started moving downstream. I watched the shore slip away, the trees getting smaller and smaller. That's when it hit me. I was leaving home. Really leaving. I'd never been this far from my territory before. The air changed, grew colder, and I could smell things I didn't recognize. Smoke from distant fires, the scent of people. The journey on the river felt like forever. I didn't know where we were going, and I didn't care. I just sat there, sullen and angry. Every now and then, one of the Indians would look at me and I'd glare back, but there was no fight left in me. My body was exhausted and my mind was numb. I think I even dozed off at one point because I woke up to the sound of shouting and realized we'd stopped. We were at a settlement, a bunch of wooden buildings clustered together. There were more people here, all staring at me. I could feel their eyes on me, and it made my skin crawl. They were pointing and whispering, and some of them looked scared. I tried to stand up straight to show them I wasn't afraid, but I was tied too tightly. The Indians handed me over to a group of men, dressed in strange clothes. Heavy fabrics in colors I'd never seen. They spoke a different language, one that sounded even harsher than the Indians. They led me to a cart and pushed me inside, locking the door behind me. The cart was dark and smelled like animals, probably used for transporting livestock. I curled up in a corner, feeling the wood vibrate as the cart started moving. I don't know how long we traveled. Days, maybe weeks. It's all a blur now. The jolting of the cart, the occasional stops where they give me water and food, but never enough. I could tell we were going somewhere far because the landscape changed outside the small window, from forests to fields to places with big stone buildings. Eventually, we arrived in France. I didn't know it was France at the time. I learned that later. All I knew was that it was crowded and loud, with smells that made my head hurt. Perfume, smoke, too many people packed together. They took me to a building in a city, and that's when the real horror began. They put me in a room with bars on the windows, like a cage. There was a bed, but I didn't use it. I preferred the floor. People would come and stare at me through the bars, pointing and laughing. Sometimes they'd throw things, coins, food, whatever they had. I'd just sit there, staring back, not understanding what they wanted from me. I was displayed like some kind of curiosity. They'd bring groups through, and a man would talk about me in that harsh language, gesturing like I was an animal. I could feel the shame burning in me, but I didn't show it. I stayed sullen, withdrawn, because what else could I do? My instincts were screaming at me to fight, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The worst part was the silence. In the woods, there was always sound, wind, animals, water. Here, it was just human noise, and it never stopped. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the distant sounds of the city, and I'd think about the forest. I'd remember the feel of moss under my feet, the taste of fresh-killed meat, the freedom of running without anyone to stop me. But that was all gone now. I was stuck in this place, with no way back. I don't know what happened to me after that. I guess I just stayed there on display until, well, I don't know, nobody ever told me. They lost interest after a while, I think. Or maybe I died there. I don't know. All I know is that day, January 4th, 1784, was the day I lost everything. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still smell the pine trees and feel the bear's hot breath on my face. But then I open them, and I'm still here, in this cage with no explanation for any of it. Story 16. We started near the 700-foot mark, right where the trees really start to get thick. The car door slamming shut was the last real familiar sound for a long time. The plan was to push for the summit, which is up around 4,300 feet. It's a steep, punishing trail, not one for beginners. Your calves burn, your lungs ache, but we knew what we were in for. We've done tougher climbs. We had our packs, our headlamps, good boots. We felt prepared. The sky was clear, not a cloud to be seen. The moon was bright, just a bit past full, and it lit up the snow on the peaks above us in this weird blue-white glow. The stars were insane. Out there with no city lights, you can see everything. It felt like you could just reach up and swipe your hand through them. We made good time, pushing hard, not talking much except to point out a tricky spot on the path or to take a quick water break. The air was cold and clean, and with every step up, it felt like we were leaving all the regular world stuff behind. We hit the summit in about 2.5 hours. It was worth it, just this vast, silent openness. You could see the dark shapes of other mountain ranges stacked up against the horizon. The wind was a low, constant whisper. We found a couple of flat rocks to sit on, cracked open some granola bars, and just soaked it in for a good hour and a half. No phones, no noise, just us and this huge, sleeping landscape. It was perfect. I remember feeling so content, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. After a while, the cold started to really seep into our bones, so we decided to head back down. We took the right-hand trail for the descent. It's a bit longer, but easier on the knees, less steep. It also winds through some of the densest timber in the area. The second we stepped onto that trail, the world changed. The moon and stars were mostly blocked out by this ceiling of pine and fir branches. Our headlamps just carved out these two little tunnels of light in an ocean of black. You could only see a few feet in front of you, and then nothing. That's when the first thing happened. We were maybe 20 minutes down this trail, just walking in a comfortable silence, when I saw movement. Down to our left, maybe 30, 40 feet below us, there was a small clearing where a rock slide had taken out some trees years ago. Moonlight was hitting it, and something crossed it. It was big and dark, and it was moving on two legs. It was fast. It went from one wall of trees to the other in just a couple of strides, and then it was gone, swallowed up by the shadows. My stomach just dropped. It was this immediate physical feeling, like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I stopped dead. Bill, who was a few steps ahead, noticed and turned around. "What?" he whispered. I pointed down toward the clearing, my hand feeling stupid and shaky. Something just crossed down there. Big. He shone his headlamp where I was pointing, but the beam just didn't reach. It was just a jumble of rocks and darkness. "Bear," he said, his voice low and sure. "Gotta be." Standing up to get a look. They do that. It made sense. It had to be a bear. What else could it be? We've seen bears out here before, though never at night. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and we started walking again. But the easy feeling was gone. Now, every little sound seemed louder. The crunch of our boots on the gravel, the rustle of our jackets. It felt like we were making too much noise. A few minutes later, we heard rocks tumbling. Not a natural little trickle, but a real clatter, like something had dislodged a bunch of them. It came from our right, from the steep slope that rose up beside the trail. We both stopped again, turning our lamps toward the sound. We saw nothing, just the dark trunks of trees and the tangled undergrowth. "Probably just a deer," Bill said, but he didn't sound as sure this time. His voice was tighter. We kept walking, picking up our pace a little. The trail curved along the side of the mountain, a long, slow switchback, and then we heard it again. More rocks, this time from our left down the slope. It was keeping pace with us. Whatever it was moving through the steep, rough terrain on the side of the trail, matching our speed on the clear path. My heart was hammering against my ribs now. This wasn't a deer. A deer would have bolted. A bear would have likely moved away. This thing was staying with us. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt heavy. It felt full. Like the darkness between the trees was solid, and it was watching us. I could feel the hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing up. It was a primal feeling, something deep in my lizard brain screaming that we were not the top of the food chain out here. "Hey!" Bill suddenly yelled, his voice cracking a little in the silence. "Get out of here! Go on!" I joined him, shouting into the blackness. "Yeah! Beat it!" Our voices sounded small and pathetic, swallowed by the sheer size of the night. We listened. Nothing. No more rocks. Just the sound of our own ragged breathing. For a second, I felt a flicker of hope. We scared it off. Then the sound started. It was a deep rhythmic thump, not like a wood knock. This was heavier, deeper. It was a sound you felt in your chest more than you heard with your ears. Thump. Then a pause. Thump. It was coming from ahead of us, down the trail. It was slow, deliberate. Thump. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a waiting silence. We were frozen, just staring into the narrow cones of our headlamps, trying to see what was making that sound. We couldn't see a thing. My mouth was so dry it felt like it was full of cotton. Every instinct was telling me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of wood. "We have to keep moving," Bill whispered. He sounded terrified. We started walking again, our steps hurried and clumsy now. The trail curved around a big outcropping of rock, a sharp switchback. As we came around the bend, our headlamps swept across the path ahead, and we saw it. About 75 feet in front of us, right in the middle of the trail, were two eyes. They were a brilliant, glowing red, not like an animal's eyeshine, which is usually green or yellow. This was red like hot coals, and they were high up. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things were a good 3-4 feet above my eye level, so they were looking at us from about 10 feet off the ground. We both froze again, completely paralyzed. The thing was just standing there, a massive black shape blotting out the trail behind it. It was huge. I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette of immense shoulders and a thick, powerful body. It was swaying, just slightly from side to side. The fear was absolute. It was a cold wave that washed over me, draining all the warmth from my body. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at those two red dots burning in the darkness. Then Bill moved. In a burst of pure panic, he bent down, grabbed a fist-sized rock from the side of the trail, and hurled it. It was a stupid, desperate thing to do. I wouldn't have had the nerve. The rock flew through the beams of our headlamps, and we heard a solid, wet thwack as it hit the thing, right in the center of its face, near those eyes. The sound that came out of it then, I will never, ever forget that sound. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was an explosion, a deafening, guttural, furious roar that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. The volume of it was physical. It hit me in the chest like a punch, vibrating through my bones, rattling my teeth. I actually felt the air pressure change. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. That broke the spell. We turned and ran. We didn't think, we just ran. Back the way we came, uphill, which was the worst possible direction, but it was the only one we knew. We were scrambling, our boots slipping on the loose gravel, our packs bouncing and throwing us off balance. I could hear Bill right behind me, his breathing a ragged sob. Then I heard a crash and a cry. I skidded to a stop and looked back. Bill was down. He'd tripped over a root or a rock and gone down hard. His backpack had twisted around him. One of the straps caught under his arm, pinning him. He was struggling, trying to get up, but he was tangled and panicked. I ran back to him, my heart trying to burst out of my chest. As I got to him, I looked up the trail, back toward the creature. It was there. It had covered the 75 feet in seconds. It was standing over Bill, and for the first time, I saw it clearly in the combined light of our fallen headlamps and the slivers of moonlight coming through the trees. It was enormous. I'm not talking Big Bear enormous. I'm talking its shoulders were as wide as the trail, and the trail was wide enough for two people to walk side by side. It had to be 8, 9 feet tall. It was covered in long, dark, matted hair that was caked with mud and pine needles. The smell hit me then, a thick, musky, foul odor, like a wet dog mixed with rotting meat and old blood. It was suffocating. Its face... God, its face. It was almost human-like, but stretched and wrong. The brow was heavy, the nose was flat, and its eyes... They weren't glowing red anymore, but in the light I could see they were a deep, dark brown. And they were fixed on Bill with an intelligence that was utterly terrifying. This wasn't just an animal. This was something else. It bent forward at the waist, its long arms hanging down. Its hands, they were hands with fingers and a thumb, brushing the ground. It opened its mouth, and I saw these huge, yellowed teeth. It let out another roar, this one lower, but just as powerful. It was a sound of promise, a sound that said we were dead. Bill was screaming, a high-pitched, terrified sound. The creature was leaning down, reaching for him. I don't know what came over me. Pure adrenaline, maybe. Blind terror. I was still holding my hiking pole, one of those metal ones with a sharp tip. Without even thinking, I swung it. I put my whole body into it, a wild baseball-style swing. The metal shaft connected with the side of its face with a sickening crack. I felt the impact jolt all the way up my arm. The creature let out a completely different sound, a high-pitched, piercing scream of pain and shock. It staggered back, one of its huge hands flying up to clutch at its face, right where I'd hit it. It stumbled, its feet getting tangled, and then it fell. It didn't just fall over, it tumbled backward down the steep slope to the side of the trail. I heard a crashing, snapping sound as it rolled through the undergrowth, its screams turning into roars of fury and pain, growing fainter as it plummeted down the mountainside. I didn't wait. I dropped my pole, grabbed Bill by the straps of his pack, and hauled him to his feet. He was crying and hyperventilating, but he was moving. I half-carried, half-dragged him down the trail. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We just ran. For the next 15 minutes, as we stumbled and fell our way down that mountain, we could hear it. It was down in the valley below us, thrashing and roaring. The sounds echoed through the forest, a symphony of pure, raw fury. It was the most terrifying 15 minutes of my life. Every second, I expected it to come crashing back up the slope and finish what it started, but it didn't. The sounds slowly grew fainter, more distant, until they finally faded away altogether. We didn't slow down. We just kept running, driven by a fear so deep it was like a fire in our veins. We finally burst out of the trees at the lower trailhead, just as the sky was starting to turn grey with dawn. We fell against the side of my car, gasping and shaking. Bill was in bad shape, his face pale, clutching his shoulder. We drove straight to the hospital in the nearest town. They said he had a fractured clavicle from his fall. The doctors and the nurse asked what happened. We just said we were night hiking and he took a bad fall. What were we supposed to say? That we were attacked by a 9-foot-tall creature with red eyes that smelled like death and screamed like a demon? They'd have thought we were crazy. We never went back for our gear. My headlamp, Bill's, my hiking pole. They're still up there. It's been months now. Bill doesn't really talk about it. I don't sleep much. Every time I close my eyes, I see those 2 red dots in the dark, and I hear that roar. It's a sound that doesn't belong in this world. I swung a metal pole and hit a living thing square in the face. I felt the bone, or whatever it was, give way. I heard it scream. I know it was real. But what was it? I don't know. I don't think I want to know. All I know for sure is that we went up that mountain as 2 guys who thought they knew the wilderness, and we came back down knowing that we don't know anything at all. There are things out there in the dark, in the deep woods, that we aren't ever supposed to see, and one of them has my scent, and it has a reason to remember me. Story 17. Okay, so this happened back in March, on the 27th to be exact. It was a Tuesday morning, and my wife and I were in the kitchen just doing our usual routine. We live in this house in Florida, out in a kind of semi-rural area, not totally isolated, but we've got some space between us and the neighbors. Lots of trees around, especially to the east where the woods start. That morning the sun was already up, but it was still early, maybe around 7:30 or so. The air was warm and a bit sticky, like it always is here, and I could hear birds chirping outside, the usual morning sounds. Nothing out of the ordinary. We were making breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, I think, and I was standing by the sink, rinsing out a couple of mugs. My wife was at the counter, slicing some fruit. The kitchen window looks out into our backyard, which slopes down a bit toward the tree line. It's not a huge yard, maybe about 50 feet from the house to where the woods begin, but it feels open enough that you can see most of it from inside. I happened to glance out the window, and that's when I saw movement. At first I thought it was just a deer, Or maybe our neighbor from down the road, Mr. Henderson, who's tall, like 6'4", and sometimes cuts through the edge of our property if he's out walking. But something about it didn't look right. It was too dark, and the way it moved was smooth, not jerky like a deer, and not like a person shuffling along. This thing was walking upright, straight-legged, almost gliding. I leaned in closer, squinting, and my heart just kind of skipped a beat. It was a figure, all dark, like a deep brown or black, and it was tall, really tall, taller than Mr. Henderson for sure. It was coming from the west side of the yard, near where we have a few bushes, and it was heading east, straight toward the woods. It didn't hurry or anything. It just moved at a steady pace, like it had somewhere to be but wasn't in a rush. The whole thing was maybe 50 feet away from the house, so I had a pretty clear view, but it was over in seconds. The way it walked, it was so fluid. No swinging arms or anything, just this smooth, silent motion. Its legs seemed long and slender, and the body was slim, not bulky like a bear or something. The color was uniform, dark all over, and it didn't have any features I could make out. No face, no clothes, just this shadowy shape. It didn't make a sound either. No rustling leaves, no footsteps, nothing. That's what got me. The silence. Out here you usually hear things moving through the grass or crunching twigs, but this was dead quiet. I must have frozen because my wife noticed me staring. She asked, "What is it?" But before I could even answer, our 8-year-old granddaughter came running into the kitchen from the living room. She'd been playing by the sliding glass door that leads to the backyard, and she was all wide-eyed and breathless. She yelled, "Grandpa, did you see that? The big thing outside." Her voice was shaky, and she pointed toward the yard. I looked back out the window, but the figure was already gone, vanished behind the trees at the edge of the woods. My wife turned to me, her face pale, and I could feel my own hands trembling. I set the mug down on the counter, and it clattered a little because I wasn't steady. The normal morning sounds, the birds, the hum of the fridge, suddenly felt too loud, like they were highlighting how quiet everything else was. My granddaughter ran up to me and grabbed my arm. She was describing what she saw, and it sent chills down my spine. She said it was big and tall, like really tall, taller than Mr. Henderson, and it was dark, all dark, and it moved so smooth, like it was sliding. She's just a kid, but she was so specific. She noticed the same things I did. The slim build, the dark color, the way it didn't jerk or stumble. She said it looked like it was made of shadows and that it didn't have a face she could see. I remember my breath catching in my throat and I had to swallow hard. My wife came over and put a hand on my shoulder, her fingers cold. She hadn't seen it herself, but she could tell from our reactions that something was wrong. The three of us just stood there for a moment, staring out the window at the empty yard. The trees where it had disappeared looked darker suddenly, like they were hiding something. I decided we needed to check it out, but I was scared, like really scared. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my skin felt clammy. I told my wife to stay inside with our granddaughter, and I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. Even though it was morning, the woods can be dim. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside, and the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The grass was damp with dew, and I could see my footprints forming as I walked. I headed toward the spot where I'd seen the figure cross. It was near a patch of taller grass that we hadn't mowed yet, and as I got closer, I noticed something odd. The grass was pressed down in a line, like something had walked through it. But it wasn't a messy trail like a deer would make. It was a straight path, about 2 feet wide, with the blades bent evenly. No broken stems or anything, just this smooth indentation. I knelt down to look, and my knees felt weak. The ground was soft there, and I could see impressions in the soil. They weren't footprints, not like any animal or person I've ever seen. They were long and narrow, almost oval-shaped and deep, like whatever made them was heavy. But there were no claw marks, no toe outlines, just these depressions spaced about 3 or 4 feet apart. That meant whatever it was had a long stride which matched how tall it looked. I shone the flashlight into the woods, but it didn't help much. The trees were thick, and the light just bounced off the leaves, making shadows dance. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it standing behind me. The woods have always felt peaceful to me, but now they seemed menacing, like they were watching me. After a few minutes, I went back inside. My wife was waiting by the door, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Our granddaughter was sitting at the kitchen table, hugging her knees, and she looked so small and scared. I told them what I'd found, and my wife's eyes got wide. She said, "We should call someone." But who? The police? And say what? That we saw a tall, dark figure? They'd think we were crazy. We spent the rest of the morning just sitting in the kitchen, talking in hushed voices. Every little noise made us jump. A branch tapping the window, the wind rustling the trees. My granddaughter kept asking questions like, "What was it, Grandpa? And is it coming back?" I didn't have any answers. I tried to reassure her, but my voice was shaky, and I think she knew I was just as scared. Around noon, we decided to take a drive around the property just to see if we could spot anything else. We got in the car, and I drove slowly along the dirt road that skirts the woods. The sun was higher now, and it was getting hot, but I still felt cold. We didn't see anything unusual, no more tracks, no movement, just the normal Florida landscape, palm trees, pines, and underbrush. But the whole time, I had this knot in my stomach, like something was wrong. When we got back, we locked all the doors and windows, which we never do during the day. My wife made lunch, but none of us ate much. I kept peering out the windows, especially toward the east woods. The memory of that figure was burned into my mind, the way it moved so effortlessly, like it belonged there. But it didn't. It was out of place, unnatural. Later that afternoon, I went outside again, this time with my phone, thinking I'd take pictures of the tracks. But when I got to the spot, the impressions were already fading, like the grass was springing back up. The dew had dried, and the marks were less distinct. It was as if the whole thing was erasing itself, and that made it even creepier. I took a few photos, but they didn't come out clear, just blurry images of bent grass. As the day wore on, the fear didn't go away. It just settled into this low-level dread. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see it again, standing there, watching the house. My granddaughter didn't want to play outside anymore, and she stayed close to us, which isn't like her. She's usually so independent, but that day she was clingy and quiet. By evening, we were all exhausted, but none of us wanted to go to bed. We sat in the living room with the lights on, watching TV, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying those few seconds, the movement, the figure, the silence. I thought about how quickly it had happened and how, if I hadn't been looking at that exact moment, I might have missed it. But my granddaughter saw it too, and that confirmed it wasn't just my imagination. We eventually went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Every creak in the house made me tense up, and I kept getting up to check the windows. The woods outside were pitch black, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. The next few days we talked about it less, but it was always there, in the back of our minds. We never saw it again, and nothing else strange happened. But that one morning on March 27th changed how I see things. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the sounds and movements around me. And every time I look out at those woods, I remember that dark, tall figure gliding across the yard, and I get this chill, like ice running down my spine. I still don't know what it was. A person? No, it was too tall, too smooth. An animal. Nothing I've ever heard of moves like that. Some folks might say it was Bigfoot or something, but I don't know. All I know is that for those few seconds, we saw something we couldn't explain, and it left us with this deep, unsettled feeling that hasn't gone away. And whenever I think about it, my heart starts racing all over again. like it's happening right now. Story 18. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I guess I need to get it out there. I'm Doyle Holmes, and this happened to me just a few months ago, back in early October. I still get chills thinking about it, and my wife, well, she doesn't like to talk about it much, but I know it shook her up bad too. We live out near Carter Lake, in a pretty rural area, surrounded by woods and bayous. It's quiet, the kind of place where you don't think much about anything weird happening, but that day, everything changed. It was a Thursday, I remember, because I'd taken the day off to get some chores done around the house. The weather was cool, not cold, but with that crisp fall feel that makes you want to be outside. I'd been putting off gathering firewood for the winter, and we were running low, so I figured I'd head out to the woods near Carter Lake to stock up. I've done this 100 times, just me, my axe, and the quiet of the forest. Normally it's peaceful, almost meditative, but that day, from the moment I stepped out of the truck, something felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just a little nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like the air was too still or something. I parked my truck on the old logging road that cuts through the woods, about a half-mile from the lake. The sun was up, but it was one of those overcast days where the light is kind of grey and flat, so the shadows under the trees were deeper than usual. I grabbed my gloves and the axe from the bed of the truck, and I started walking into the woods. The ground was soft from recent rains, so my boots sank in a bit with each step, making this squelching sound that was usually comforting. But today, it just seemed to echo too much, like the woods were listening. I'd been at it for maybe an hour, just chopping up some fallen branches and stacking them in a pile to haul back later. My mind was wandering, thinking about bills, what to make for dinner, stupid everyday stuff. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this sound. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. At first, I thought it might be a wounded animal, maybe a deer or something, but it was different. A low, moaning cry that seemed to come from all around me. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, kind of like a whimper mixed with a groan. It sent a shiver down my spine, and I stopped what I was doing, axe in hand, just listening. The sound came again, closer this time, from a clearing about 50 yards to my left. My heart started beating faster, and I felt this knot tighten in my stomach. I'm not a superstitious guy. I've spent my whole life in these woods, and I've seen bears, coyotes, all kinds of stuff. But this felt different. I took a few steps toward the clearing, moving slowly, trying not to make noise. The underbrush was thick, with ferns and dead leaves crunching under my feet, but I was doing my best to be quiet. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I peered through the trees, and that's when I saw it. In the middle of the clearing, there was this thing. It was about 4 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair, and it was standing on 2 legs. At first, my brain couldn't process it. I thought it might be a bear cub, but bears don't stand upright like that for long, and this thing was too slender. Its arms were long, almost dangling, and it was making that moaning sound again, like it was in distress. I could see its face, or what I thought was its face, under all that hair. It had dark eyes, and its mouth was open, letting out these pitiful cries. I just stood there, frozen. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I'd heard stories, of course, everyone around here has, about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. But here it was, right in front of me, a juvenile, I guess, because it was small, but still big enough to make my blood run cold. I could smell it too, a musky, earthy odor, like wet dog and old leaves, that made my nose wrinkle. The creature didn't seem to notice me at first. It was shuffling around in the clearing, kind of unsteady on its feet, like it was lost or hurt. Then all of a sudden, it turned its head and looked right at me. Its eyes locked with mine, and for a second, Everything stopped. I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your hands go clammy. I tightened my grip on the axe, but I didn't raise it. I was too stunned to move. Then it bolted. One moment it was there, and the next, it took off running on two legs toward the bayou. It moved fast, way faster than I would have thought possible for something that size. Its legs pumped and its arms swung, and it let out another cry, this one higher pitched, almost a screech. Without even thinking, I started running after it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe adrenaline, but I just had to see where it was going. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear it ahead of me, its footsteps thudding on the ground, and that crying sound getting fainter. The bayou was close. Mercer Bayou, a murky, swampy area filled with cypress trees and stagnant water. I'd been there before, fishing sometimes, but it's not a place you want to be alone. The ground got softer as I got closer, and I could feel the mud sucking at my boots. When I reached the edge of the bayou, I saw the creature wade into the water. It didn't hesitate, just plunged in, and within seconds, it disappeared into the murk. The water was dark, almost black, with algae and debris floating on top. I stood there, panting, my heart hammering in my chest. I could see ripples where it had gone in, but that was it. No sign of it. The bayou is dense with tangled roots and submerged logs, so it could have hidden anywhere. I waited for a few minutes, scanning the water, but nothing. The only sounds were the usual ones, frogs croaking, insects buzzing. But now they felt eerie, like they were mocking me. I felt a mix of disappointment and relief. Disappointment because I'd lost it, and relief because, honestly, I was scared out of my mind. My hands were shaking, and I had to lean against a tree to catch my breath. The smell of the bayou, rotting vegetation and stagnant water, was strong, and it made me feel nauseous. I looked around, half expecting to see something else, but the woods were quiet again. Too quiet. After a while, I decided to head back to my truck. My mind was racing with what I'd seen. I kept telling myself it had to be a bear or a large dog, but I knew it wasn't. The way it moved, the sounds it made, it was something else. I gathered up the firewood I'd left behind, my movements jerky and hurried. I just wanted to get out of there. When I got home, my wife was in the kitchen making lunch. I must have looked like hell because she asked me what was wrong right away. I told her everything, stumbling over my words, my voice shaky. She listened, her eyes wide, and when I finished, she didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, "Doyle, are you sure? Maybe it was just a bear." But I could tell she was worried. I showed her the scratches on my arms from the branches and the mud caked on my boots, and she nodded slowly. We talked about it for a while, and I guess my curiosity got the better of me. I told her I wanted to go back to see if I could find any signs, tracks or something. She didn't like the idea, but she agreed to come with me, mostly to keep an eye on me, I think. We decided to take the canoe, since the bayou is easier to navigate by water. We loaded it onto the truck, along with some gear, a flashlight, a camera, though I doubted I'd get any good pictures in the fading light. We drove back to the same spot, arriving in the late afternoon. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The air was cooler now, and a light fog was rolling in off the bayou, making everything look hazy and unreal. We unloaded the canoe and carried it to the water's edge. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Even the usual sounds of the woods seemed muted. We paddled out into the bayou, moving slowly. The water was calm, but every little splash from our paddles made me jump. My wife was in the front of the canoe, and I was in the back, steering. We didn't talk much, just scanned the banks and the water. I was looking for any sign of the creature. Tracks in the mud, broken branches, anything, but everything looked normal, just the usual mess of a swamp. We'd been out there for about 20 minutes when we heard it. At first it was just a faint sound, like a distant call. Then it got louder, a series of whoops, deep and guttural, that echoed across the water. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was too structured, too purposeful. My wife froze, her paddle hovering over the water, and I felt my blood turn to ice. The whoops came again, closer this time, and they were followed by a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the canoe. I looked toward the sound, and that's when I saw movement on the bank. Something large, much larger than the juvenile, was pushing through the trees. I couldn't see it clearly because of the fog and the distance, but it was big, taller than a man, and broad. It was dark, almost black against the grey of the woods, and it moved with a heavy, deliberate pace. Branches snapped as it came closer, and I could hear the squelch of mud under its feet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. My hands were slick with sweat, and I almost dropped the paddle. My wife whispered, "Doyle, what is that?" But I didn't have an answer. All I could do was stare as the thing emerged from the trees and stood at the water's edge. It was huge, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in the same dark hair as the juvenile. Its eyes glinted in the fading light, and it let out another whoop, this one so loud it felt like it was right on top of us. The sound was bone-chilling, full of rage or warning, I don't know which. It raised its arms, and I could see the muscles bunching under the fur. I knew in that moment that we were in danger. This wasn't some curious animal. This was a parent, maybe, protecting its young, and we were intruders. I didn't think, I just acted. I shoved the paddle into the water and started paddling backward away from the bank. My wife caught on and started paddling too, her movements frantic. The canoe rocked violently and water sloshed over the sides. The creature took a step into the water, and I heard a splash as it waded in. It was coming after us. We paddled like our lives depended on it, because in that moment I truly believed they did. The whoops continued, getting closer, and I could hear splashing behind us. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. My arms burned with the effort, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The fog thickened around us, making it hard to see, but I just focused on getting to the other side of the bayou where we'd left the truck. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the shore. I jumped out of the canoe, my legs wobbly, and helped my wife out. We didn't even bother with the canoe, we just left it there and ran for the truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. We scrambled inside, and I started the engine, peeling out down the logging road without looking back. We didn't speak the whole way home. My wife was crying softly, and I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When we got home, we locked the doors and didn't go outside for the rest of the night. I kept expecting to hear those whoops again, but everything was quiet. That was months ago, and I still can't explain what happened. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to rationalize it, but I can't. All I know is that I saw something that day that shouldn't exist, and the fear I felt, the raw, primal terror, is something I'll never forget. I haven't been back to Mercer Bayou since, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes late at night, I'll wake up hearing those whoops in my dreams, and I'll lie there sweating until the sun comes up. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real, and I know it's still out there. Story 19. Okay, so this happened a few years back, and I still get this weird feeling in my gut whenever I think about it. I've never really talked about it much because, honestly, who'd believe me? But I figure if I'm putting it out here, maybe someone else has been through something similar, and we can connect over how downright terrifying it was. So, here goes. My friend and I decided to spend that Saturday exploring the strip mines near the wampum mushroom mines in Pennsylvania. We'd heard stories about the area, how it's kind of abandoned now, but back in the day it was busy with miners digging for coal and whatever else. Neither of us had ever been there before, but we were both into hiking and checking out old forgotten places. You know, the kind of thing where you pack a backpack with some water and snacks, throw on your boots, and just go without much of a plan. It was early autumn, so the air had that crisp edge to it, and the leaves were starting to turn, but it wasn't cold enough to need a jacket. I remember the sky was overcast, kind of grey and heavy, like it might rain later, but we figured we had enough time to poke around for a few hours. We drove out there in my beat-up truck, the kind that rattles on dirt roads, and parked off this narrow trail that led into the mining area. The place was exactly what you'd expect, huge open pits dug into the earth, with piles of rubble and old machinery rusting away. Trees had started to grow back in some spots, but mostly it was just barren land, with these deep trenches and tunnels that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and shale, and you had to watch your step because it was easy to twist an ankle. The air smelled damp and earthy, like wet soil and decay, with a hint of something metallic from the old equipment. We could hear birds chirping now and then, but otherwise it was quiet. Too quiet now that I think back on it. We'd been wandering around for maybe an hour or so, just taking it all in. My friend was ahead of me, kicking at stones and pointing out weird shapes in the rock formations. I was following behind, feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots and trying to imagine what it must have been like when this place was full of people working. We weren't talking much. It was one of those comfortable silences where you're just enjoying being outside. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this sound. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It started as a low, deep groaning, like someone or something was in pain, but it had this weird echo to it that made it seem like it was coming from everywhere at once. I froze mid-step, and I saw my friend stop too, his head whipping around to try and pinpoint where it was coming from. The sound lasted for what felt like 10 seconds, but it was probably shorter, and then it cut off abruptly, leaving this eerie silence that felt heavier than before. My heart was already starting to beat faster, and I remember feeling this chill run down my spine, even though I wasn't cold. "What the hell was that?" my friend whispered, his voice tight. He's usually the calm one, but I could hear the edge in his words. I shook my head, my eyes scanning the area. We were standing near the edge of one of the bigger pits, with a steep drop-off to our left and a bunch of overgrown bushes to our right. The sound had seemed to come from deeper into the mines, maybe from one of the tunnels. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice low. Sounded like an animal or something. Maybe a bear, but it didn't quite sound right. We both stood there for a minute, just listening, but everything was dead silent again. The birds had stopped chirping, which made the whole thing feel even creepier. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up, and I had this urge to just turn around and leave, but curiosity got the better of us. We looked at each other, and without saying anything, we both started moving toward where we thought the sound had come from. It was one of those unspoken agreements. We had to check it out just in case someone was hurt or something. We picked our way carefully through the rubble, heading toward a cluster of old mine entrances that were partially collapsed. The ground was slippery in spots from recent rain, and I had to grab onto a tree root once to keep from sliding. My friend was a few feet ahead, and I could see him tensing up with every step. The air felt thicker here, like it was harder to breathe, and the damp smell was stronger, mixed with this musty odor that reminded me of old basements. As we got closer to one of the tunnel openings, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was off to the side, near a pile of broken rocks and some scrubby bushes. At first I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a deer, but then it solidified into this large, dirty brown figure. It was about 6 feet tall, maybe a bit more, and it had this thick, heavyweight build, like a boxer or a really muscular person, but bulkier. It was hunched over slightly, and its skin or fur, I couldn't tell which, was matted with dirt and grime, making it blend in with the surroundings. It wasn't moving much, just standing there. And for a second, I thought it was a brown bear. I'd seen bears before in the woods, and this thing had that same kind of powerful presence. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Without thinking, I yelled out, "Hey!" loud and sharp. the way you do to scare off an animal. I figured if it was a bear, it would run away and we'd be safe. But the moment I yelled, everything changed. The figure turned toward us, and that's when I saw its eyes. They weren't animal eyes, not like a bear's or a deer's. They were human-like, dark and intelligent, and they locked right onto mine. It was only for a split second, but it felt like an eternity. I could see the whites around the pupils, and there was this expression in them that I can't even describe. Not anger, not fear, just this intense, knowing look that made my blood run cold. My whole body went rigid, and I couldn't move or speak. I just stood there, frozen, while this thing stared right through me. Then, without making a sound, it turned and bolted. It didn't run like a bear, all clumsy and heavy. It moved with this incredible speed and grace, almost like a person, but faster than any human I've ever seen. It disappeared into one of the mine tunnels in a flash, and the only thing left was the rustle of bushes and the faint sound of gravel shifting. The whole thing happened so fast that I barely had time to process it. One moment it was there, staring at us, and the next it was gone. My friend and I just stood there, stunned. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the silence. My hands were trembling, and I had to clench them into fists to try and stop it. The fear was like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked at my friend, and his face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. "Yeah," I managed to say. "What was it?" We both knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't have eyes like that, and they don't move that way. This thing had been too human-like, too deliberate. The groaning sound we'd heard earlier came back to mind, and I wondered if it had been this thing making that noise. But why? Was it in distress, or was it something else? We stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, just staring at the tunnel where it had vanished. The entrance was dark and narrow, with bits of rock fallen around it, and it looked like it went deep into the earth. Part of me wanted to run after it, to see if we could find any trace, but another part was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. Eventually, my friend broke the silence. "We should look for it," he said, though he didn't sound too sure. "Maybe it's hurt or something." I didn't think it was hurt. It had moved too fast for that, but I agreed. We had to know. So we started searching, carefully making our way toward the tunnel. The ground was even more treacherous here, with loose rocks and patches of mud, and I had to use my hands to steady myself a couple of times. My heart was still racing, and every little sound, a twig snapping, the wind rustling leaves, made me jump. I kept expecting to see that figure again, lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. We reached the tunnel entrance and peered inside. It was pitch black, and the air coming out was cold and damp, carrying that same musty smell. We didn't have a flashlight, so we couldn't go far, but we shone our phone lights into the darkness. The beam didn't reach very deep, but we could see that the tunnel stretched on, with water dripping from the ceiling and puddles on the floor. There were no footprints or any signs that something had passed through, which was weird because the ground was muddy near the entrance. If it had run in here, there should have been tracks, but there was nothing. It was like it had just vanished into thin air. We spent the next hour or so searching the area around the mines. We checked other tunnels, climbed over rubble piles, and even ventured a little way into the woods nearby. But we found absolutely nothing. No tracks, no fur, no sounds, nothing. The whole time, I felt this creeping unease, like we were being watched. My skin was crawling, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those human-like eyes staring back at me. My friend felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept his head on a swivel and his voice stayed hushed. As we searched, my mind was racing. I've never believed in Bigfoot or any of that cryptid stuff. Always thought it was just stories made up to scare people or explain away weird noises in the woods. But what we saw, It didn't fit with any animal I knew. The build was too muscular, the eyes too intelligent, and the way it ran off without a sound was just unnatural. I started wondering if there was something out here that people didn't talk about, something that hid in these old mines and only came out when no one was around. The more we looked, the more futile it felt. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that made everything look even more sinister. The grey clouds had thickened, and a light drizzle began to fall, adding to the gloom. We were both soaked and shivering, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. My legs felt weak, and I had this headache building behind my eyes from the tension. Finally, my friend stopped and shook his head. "We're not going to find anything," he said, his voice tired. "Let's just go." I didn't argue. We turned and started making our way back to the truck, walking quickly without talking. The whole way, I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, how they'd looked right at me, like they knew exactly what I was thinking. It wasn't aggressive, it didn't charge at us or make any threatening moves, but that almost made it worse. If it had been aggressive, I could have rationalized it as an animal defending its territory. But this was different. It felt like a conscious being, and that terrified me on a whole other level. When we got back to the truck, we both slumped into the seats without saying much. I started the engine, and the rumble of the motor felt oddly comforting after the silence of the mines. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching us leave. But there was nothing there. Just the fading landscape and the rain starting to come down harder. The drive home was quiet. We didn't talk about what we'd seen. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it might not have happened. But I could feel the weight of it between us. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, and I had to grip it tight to keep them steady. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those human-like eyes staring back at me, and I'd jerk them open again. When I dropped my friend off, he just nodded and said, "Be careful," before getting out. I knew he was feeling the same way I was, unnerved, confused, and maybe a little scared to be alone. I went home and tried to go about my evening, but I couldn't focus. I took a shower and the hot water felt good on my tense muscles, but it didn't wash away the unease. I kept thinking about the groaning sound, the figure, the way it had disappeared. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and every little noise from outside made me jump. I've never been one to get spooked easily, but this had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. In the days that followed, I found myself researching online, looking up stories about strange encounters in Pennsylvania, especially around the Wampum area. I came across a few accounts from people who claimed to have seen something similar. Large bipedal creatures with human-like features, often near old mines or remote woods. Some called it Bigfoot. Others had different names, but the descriptions matched what we saw. Reading those stories didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made the whole thing more real and more frightening. I've never gone back to those strip mines. My friend and I have talked about it a couple of times since then, but we always end up dropping the subject because it's just too weird. He says he still has nightmares about it sometimes, and I do too. That encounter challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. I used to laugh at the idea of cryptids, but now I'm not so sure. There are things out there that we don't understand, and sometimes they cross paths with us in ways that leave you with more questions than answers. To this day, I can't explain what we saw that afternoon. Was it a bear? No, it wasn't. Was it Bigfoot? I don't know. But whatever it was, it felt ancient and intelligent, and it left me with this lingering sense that there's more to this world than what we see on the surface. I still get chills thinking about it, and if I'm honest, I probably always will.